Okay, good evening. We're back in public session, and before we commence, I'll read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by waters originally inhabited by indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I will note our attendance. Everybody is present this evening. We have Trustee Olmsted, Trustee Burgess, and Student Trustee Isabel Unger on the phone. Declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest? Seeing no conflicts of interest, we'll move on to item F, which is actions from the board meeting private session. There were no actions of the board meeting from the private session this evening. We'll move on to item G, approval of the minutes. A motion to approve the minutes from October 20th, 2020. Trustee Hatfield, Trustee Cook. Is the question, Trustee Halberstadt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, with regard to the minutes, on page 8, there's a paragraph. There's a paragraph including me where I noted that I talked to the health unit and they're working on a protocol to allow for, the minutes say games and team practices. It's definitely not games, it's just practices. So I'd like that revised. Yes, please.
Is there any other discussion? All in support? As amended? Opposed? It's carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes? No business arising. Student Trustee Suave, would you like to do a presentation for us?
Yes, thank you. At the end of October, Isabel and I participated in the Ontario Student Trustees Association's Fall General Meeting. The virtual conference was an incredible professional development and networking opportunity. Guest speakers at the conference included Stefan Leche, Minister of Education, and Nancy Naylor, Deputy Minister of Education. Isabel is co-chairing the Student Wellbeing Working Group, and I'm co-chairing the Ontario Student Voice Awards Working Group. And we were able to meet with our teams and plan our activities for the year. We also engaged in a variety of discussions in smaller regional groups. Isabel and I would like to again thank Director Kelly for supporting us in this opportunity. Isabel and I were honored to participate in a great community partnership opportunity at the end of last month. We were contacted by Jasleen Dayal, the University of Windsor Students Alliance Vice President of Student Life and the Women's Center Coordinator, to take part in a video compilation to celebrate Women's History Month. We both were happy to contribute a short video saying why it is important to empower girls, and a complete video compilation can be found on the University of Windsor Students Alliance Facebook and Instagram. Friday, November 6th was Random Act of Kindness Day in Windsor, Essex. This year, Student Senate used its social media platforms to spread some kindness virtually. We collected photos of senators holding signs thanking frontline and essential workers. We then put these photos into a collage and posted it on our Instagram and Twitter. We also created an appreciation story template for Instagram. It was shared on our Instagram and students could tag someone they appreciate and explain why. The person who was tagged would then pass it on and tag someone who they appreciate. It was wonderful to see so many students engage in this activity, paying forward kindness to their friends. Preparations continue for our virtual Student Leadership Conference that will take place on Microsoft Teams November 27th. With only 10 days left until the conference, we are busy finalizing the agenda with the help of our Student Senate Subcommittee. The conference will focus on anti-racism, environmental sustainability, and mental health and wellness. We are very excited to note that our keynote speaker is the leader of the New Democratic Party and MP for Burnaby South, Mr. Jagmeet Singh. We can't wait to see students from across the board participating in the event, and we are confident that it will be a great experience. Isabel and I continue to meet virtually with students to hear their perspective and their concerns. We look forward to meeting with students throughout the year and continuing to consult on matters important to students through Student Senate and beyond. And I believe Isabel will be reading our Student of the Month.
Student Trustee Unger.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to read the Student of the Month right now. Sorry about that. Remy Allison is a grade 12 student at Tecumseh Vista Academy who consistently demonstrates this month's theme of kindness within her school and community. Remy has been fundraising for the Terry Fox Foundation since she was 5 years old. She has raised over $70,000 for cancer research through her annual lemonade stand for the Terry Fox Foundation for Cancer Research. Remy has fundraised for Street Help Homeless Shelter and the Downtown Mission of Windsor. Remy helped organize and volunteer during the June 27th Miracle Can Drive this past June. She organizes the student volunteers at the Tecumseh Terry Fox Run every year. Before COVID, Remy visited Huron Terrace Retirement Home monthly to play piano for the senior citizens. She is passionate about helping others and shares this passion with her peers. This past September, she was unable to hold her usual fundraiser for the Terry Fox Foundation, so she created a new fundraiser, one that is completely virtual. She was part of the student tutoring program as a math science tutor to younger students in grade 9, 10 and 11, and was the camp counselor student leader for the GECDSB grade 7 leadership camp for her first 2 years of high school. She was on student parliament in grade 9 and 10 and is currently on parliament as the charitable liaison for Tecumseh Vista. She is also a member of the concert band, jazz band, badminton team, and works as a barista server at the Nature Cup. And that is November Student of the Month for the theme of kindness, Remy Allison. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the student trustees? No questions for the student trustees. There's no delegations, which moves us to the speakers list. The first person on the speaker list is Mr. Sean O'Neill. Mr. O'Neill, go ahead.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Members of the Board of Trustees for the Greater Essex County District School Board, I'm here tonight to speak with you about my campaign for balanced education in Windsor, Essex County. I created and circulated a petition 2 weeks ago expressing the concern and exasperation that students, teachers, and parents are feeling towards the current hybrid model schedule that we have for high school learning in Windsor, Essex. I expressed my concerns and made 4 suggestions for a better school schedule that should be introduced by the February quadmester. I was interviewed by CTV News, the Windsor Star, CBC News, and Radio Canada about my petition a few days after its creation. Since then, I've received an overwhelming amount of support from the community, and as of now have collected over 1,100 signatures. As well, I've received hundreds of comments on the Windsor Star Facebook page and on my petition for parents and students expressing their frustration with the current hybrid model system. I've linked my petition as well as a PDF of the Windsor Star Facebook page comments in the email this was sent in. Here are some examples of the comments. My son at Sandwich had an awful experience since September, beyond overwhelming and mentally damaging. Something needs to change for the students, teachers, and parents. I'm mentally exhausted and can't keep up with school and my life outside of school. As a student, I find my marks much lower than they could be because of trying to cram weeks' worth of information into a couple of days. My son does not work well at home. He is much more focused and productive at school. Getting work done at home is very hard. When I signed him up for in-class learning, I expected mostly in-class learning. The current system is still a majority at-home learning. That's not what I signed up for. So, what do we want? We want the Greater Essex County District School Board to advocate to change the designation from the Ministry of Education on Windsor, Essex. We want our area to be non-designated, which would allow the school boards to choose a scheduling system that adapts to the current concern for the COVID-19 virus in Windsor, Essex. The schedule for which the community is advocating for in the petition is for 2 150-minute classes a day, plus the return of extracurriculars that can maintain safe practices, as well as the removal of cohorts and the reestablishment of awards, assemblies, school photos, and other activities that can be done whilst following proper COVID-19 guidelines. However, most importantly, we expect full transparency from the Greater Essex County District School Board on plans for our schools. The impression that we've been given is that we are locked into this horrific plan for the rest of the school year, and that is unacceptable. We accept the fact that we may not return to a normal timetable this school year, but we don't accept that we can't get closer. Teachers, parents, and especially students have the right to know the plan and the criteria that needs to be met for getting there. If you don't have a plan, then I'm sorry, you're not doing your job. With that, I formally present our petition, and I request that the Greater Essex County District School Board begin to change our current high school schedule to one that benefits mental health, education, and safety, and that your plan for moving forward be presented at your next public meeting. Thank you for your time. I can now take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Are there any questions? I do have one. I had reached out to you through email, and I'm wondering if you plan on presenting your petition to the local MPP for presentation at Queen's Park.
Yes, this was my first step in this campaign, and depending on the result of this meeting, I will take further measures to contact our local member of parliament and provincial parliament and keep this going. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for administration.
Okay, one moment. I have Trustee Higginson up next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the speaker. Thank you, Sean, for your presentation and your advocacy work. I'm just wondering if you've been in touch with, we just heard a presentation from our student trustees here. I'm wondering if you've been in touch with them and with Student Senate and had any discussions through them and what came of those.
Yes, I spoke with the student trustees earlier this month, and they gave me the information to set up this meeting with the board today.
Trustee Burgess, do you have a question for the speaker, not administration, for the speaker themselves?
No, it's. I'll wait for trustee question period if you think it's more appropriate there. It's for administration from information that the speaker shared.
Okay, that can wait for question period.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? Trustee Halberstadt.
Yeah, Sean, could you just repeat, slow down a little bit on the way you'd like to see the system run? I know you did talk about two semesters, but could you repeat that again, please?
So the schedule for which the community is advocating for in the petition is for 2 150-minute classes a day, plus the return of extracurriculars that can maintain safe practices, as well as the removal of cohorts and the reestablishment of awards, assemblies, school photos, and other activities that can be done while following proper COVID-19 guidelines.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. I see we have a copy of your comments, Mr. O'Neill. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Our next guest speaker is Lisa Bonicci.
Hello?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. My name is Lisa Bonicci. As a mother, I value the new protocols to limit the spread of COVID-19 in our schools. New cleaning and disinfecting measures are appropriate and will help keep staff and students healthy, only if, and I stress only if, the products do not increase other health risks. Our board uses Virex 2, 256, and Oxivir TB. After researching these disinfectants, it's easy to see Virex carries many risks. There are known health hazards associated with quaternary ammonium compounds, or quats, and Virex contains 2. Quats are antibacterial pesticides and are linked to serious health effects, ongoing research shows. Current safety standards for chemicals don't consider emerging literature, so regulations do not keep pace with scientific evidence. For example, the Government of Canada Chemicals Management Plan includes thousands of chemicals to be assessed, including quats. Therefore, the precautionary principle should be practiced. You can't afford to make a mistake. The safety of kids is paramount. There are many alarming facts about quats. I have provided a detailed list. I will name a few. They trigger asthmatic and allergic reactions, cause new onset of allergies and asthma. In animal studies, they are linked to reproductive harm, hormone disruption, decreased fertility, birth defects, disturbs the development of an embryo or fetus. Residue accumulates on surfaces, dust contaminates air, meaning chemical exposures are not only during usage. It's important to note that although Virex is diluted, it's still toxic because it contains quats. I have provided you with 4 tables that indicate health and environmental concerns of diluted quats and many sources.
I have had direct correspondence with 6 professionals so far who have done studies. I have provided a copy of some quotes from these researchers. I will read a few. Dr. Rule is from the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She told me even when diluted, quats remain in the environment and accumulate every time you use them. We don't know enough to be able to affirm with certainty that they are safe at any concentration and should be avoided around children. She sent me the Maryland Pesticide Education Network Safety Alert regarding disinfectant and pesticide use during COVID-19. It specifically states, avoid and replace disinfectants and cleaners containing quats. I have provided a copy to you. Dr. Nadeau is the director of Sean N. Parker Center for Allergy and Asthma Research at Stanford University. She has devoted 30-plus years to understanding how environmental and genetic factors affect the risk of developing allergies and asthma. When I asked her opinion of quat-based disinfectants in schools, she stated, there are many toxicants in some of these cleaning products. Ammonium compounds, I would try to avoid. It's not good for your lungs. Dr. Harubek is a reproductive and developmental toxicologist at Virginia Tech. I have provided a copy of a statement from her. Her animal studies link quat-based disinfectants to fertility and birth defects, and diluted disinfectant was used. She found that mice dosed with the chemicals and mice that were in the environment where the cleaners were used both elicited effects. Normal use exposure of the diluted disinfectant includes mopping, spraying surfaces, etc. This represents how people might be exposed, such as students or staff in school. Dosed and exposed male and female mice experience a decline in fertility, birth defects, etc. This is alarming. This means mice that merely in presence of these toxic disinfectants had the same effects as mice who literally ate the quat disinfectant. Please note, students are using Virex themselves. This is shocking. Can we take these findings and apply them to our children? Dr. Harubek said, since rodent research is the gold standard in the biomedical sciences, this raises a big red flag that these chemicals may be toxic to humans as well. I spoke with the Ontario Federation of Home and School Associations, and they share my concerns. The executive committee reviewed their policies and found, one about air quality, that there should be child-based indoor air quality standards in Ontario schools. This policy is applicable because quats contaminate the air and dust, meaning exposure can be through inhalation. Boards choose which disinfectant to use. I have contacted 41 Ontario boards so far and have received responses from 9 so far. 4 exclusively use safer disinfectants, hydrogen peroxide-based and isopropyl. I am aware of a botanical disinfectant used by several Toronto schools, but I'm awaiting confirmation that it is bore-wide. No one can say with certainty that the new frequent and broad usage is safe, resulting in unprecedented exposure of quats. Rather, I would say the evidence points to danger. There's not enough time to mention all the research. Concerns of negative health effects from regular exposure to quats is warranted. We need to focus on the students, our children. If we must choose between toxic and non-toxic, health risks and no health risks, the choice should be clear. I am not alone in my concerns, and I have a petition of 342 signatures so far. I am confident the board will be proactive and stop using quat-based disinfectants like Virex and adopt safe cleaning and disinfecting practices that prioritize health and safety. Other products are approved, effective, and safe. Do this for the kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the speaker? Trustee Halberstadt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Lisa, could you repeat the alternative to Virex that you might recommend? I think you talked about hydrogen peroxide-based product. Is there anything else that might be in our schools now that could be seen as an option?
I am aware that our schools have access to Oxiver currently, and when I spoke to the other school boards in Ontario, the ones that did use alternatives used another hydrogen peroxide-based disinfectant called Vert to Go Saber. There's another one called Preempt, and there was another one that I'm confirming for Toronto. It's a botanical-based one. And those are the ones that I'm aware of, but I do know that our schools currently have Oxiver.
Trustee Sartori.
Hi, Lisa. Can you just clarify the product that you're referring to? Is it Virex or Virox?
Thank you. Yes, it is Virex.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Madame Leboeuf, do you have a copy of her words, or you need that? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bonicci. Madame Leboeuf will be contacting you for an emailed copy of your speaking words.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Christina Koski. Christina, are you there?
Here.
Okay, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Good evening. My daughter attended senior kindergarten at the beginning of this school year. Shortly after, my husband and I researched the disinfectants that were being used in her school. We were interested in this because there's obviously abnormal sanitation taking place that we've never experienced before. We were shocked with what we found. Quat-based disinfectants, including Virex, which is used at my daughter's school, are toxic and linked to acute and chronic health issues even when used in proper diluted form. These chemicals can create chronic respiratory conditions. They're linked to hormone disruption and reproductive issues. Technically speaking, disinfectants are registered pesticides and should not be used in the presence of children. This is all well documented. Why has no one paid attention to this? My husband, an engineer who is very data-driven, and myself continued our research for days into the late hours of night while our 3 children were sleeping. The more we researched, the more disgusted we were. Where is the scientific literature telling me quats use this frequently and broadly are safe? There are none. Schools have never disinfected at this rate and frequency before. Where are the studies telling me I should be concerned? There's a plethora of evidence, and this is with pre-COVID-19 normal use. A concerning property about quats is regarding accumulation and residue. Quats accumulate in air and surfaces, posing an immediate threat. According to the Environmental Working Group, these chemicals, I quote, form residues that remain on desks, floors, and other clean surfaces. They adhere to children's skin, including their hands, where exposure can occur through ingestion or absorption through the skin. These chemicals may also build up in dust, leading to exposure through inhalation, ingestion, and skin absorption. This agrees with the mice study conducted by Dr. Patricia Hunt, and I know Lisa mentioned her already, but I just want to point out that Dr. Hunt and her fellow researchers actually stopped using Virex in their study because of its linkage to infertility and birth defects in the study's lab mice, but still, quat residue was found up to 2 months later, and this is after actively trying to wash away the quat chemical residue. This chemical accumulation makes this an urgent matter because the schools are continually using quats at unprecedented levels, as we know. Custodians aren't aware of the hazardous residue buildup, and they're not trying to rid surfaces of quats, but rather doing the exact opposite with their widespread, repeated use. Given this, along with other alarming findings, many already mentioned by Lisa, I could go on all night with the research, but given this, I was surprised schools are even using quat-based disinfectants, but truthfully, not that surprised. BPA, Roundup, mercury, cigarette smoking, thalidomide, asbestos, all widely accepted and approved chemicals or products at one time. Despite being approved by Health Canada or other certifying bodies, we all know the dangers and toxicity of these once widely used products. It takes time and effort for progression, even though the board has used Virex for 12 years, even though it's Health Canada approved, and even though you may not think it's dangerous, the science is crystal clear. Quat-based disinfectants are not safe. My husband and I sat down and made the difficult decision to remove our daughter from school. It was a very hard decision. I also have a baby and a 3-year-old at home. Health and safety of our daughter is the priority. The board should take immediate corrective action and stop using Virex and create safer and healthier classrooms. Other school boards in Ontario and at least 11 states use safer disinfectants. We cannot control the fate of COVID-19, but we can control how we react and what products we use. We cannot and should not ignore what the experts are saying. Environmental health experts recommend hydrogen peroxide when disinfecting is required. hydrogen peroxide-based disinfectants are Health Canada approved, they're effective, yet they are asthma-friendly and non-toxic. The board already carries an HP-based product called Oxiver, as Lisa stated. Since this disinfectant is effective yet doesn't pose harm, why aren't schools using this product instead? Experts also cite other safe options, ones that are citric acid or alcohol-based, for example. You can refer to the Maryland document that Lisa referenced, as these could all be possible options to consider. The school board should be balancing the risks and benefits and using the safest products possible, just as other school boards are doing. We can harness this COVID-19 time to make a good change for once, as it's triggered concern and opened the public's eyes about disinfectants and their risks. Schools, above all else, should be exercising the most caution, as our dear students, our sons, our daughters, spend much of their waking hours in a school building. Our children are the most vulnerable population when they're developing respiratory systems. And what about our adolescents? They're not safe from the dangers either. I'm just concluding now. The precautionary principle means if the science isn't yet clear, to err on the side of caution. In this case, the science is clear, yet we leaped into sanitation never before practiced or studied. I am acknowledging we must sanitize and disinfect more at this time, but let's use safe products. We cannot wait for COVID-19 sanitation effects to be studied before we make a change. I'm not willing to allow my daughter to be a guinea pig. We know Virex is toxic, therefore the choice should be clear on what to do next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Trustee Cook.
Just a quick question. You had mentioned that other school boards are using a different product. I was just wondering if you could tell me what school boards in Ontario are using something different, and if so, what are they using?
Yes, let me just look through my notes here because I don't know it off by heart, but I do have them. So these are confirmed as of the last week or so. Blue Water District School Board. They use HP and isopropyl-based products. The Algoma District School Board. HP, the one that's called Vert2Go, is the Sabre, I believe. Then the third one is Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. They use HP-based, so and specifically Oxiver and Preempt, I believe it's called. The next one is Simcoe. They use HP, Oxiver. And we are waiting on the Toronto District School Board, but we know there's at least a few schools that use a botanical-based one, which I believe the active ingredient is thymol-based. It uses thyme oil, but we're still waiting for that confirmation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
For clarification, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that HP, you're talking about hydrogen peroxide base?
Correct. Sorry, yes, HP, I'm referring to hydrogen peroxide.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's no questions. If you could share your document, your speech to Madame Leboeuf through email, she'll be reaching out to you. That would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ms. Karen Donnell. Can you hear us?
Yes.
And we can hear you. Go ahead. 5 minutes.
My name is Karen Donnell. My child is an SK student on the board. She was always healthy, had no issues whatsoever growing up. As soon as she started school last year, she caught a cold, which wasn't surprising being her first year of school. She was given antibiotics, but the cough didn't go away. From September 2019 to March 2020, my child couldn't get rid of a cough and got antibiotics and puffers several times. She was referred to a pediatric respiratory specialist in London, Ontario, who diagnosed her with asthma in February. Her cough only disappeared once classes were canceled. In March, due to the pandemic, and never returned until September, when school began again. In the middle of August 2020, my child saw an allergist. She got poked with 20 little needles and tested negative to each allergen. She was also tested for asthma and had no asthma. What a relief. I was told she didn't need the puffers, but once she gets a cold, to see her right away as she starts to cough. Come September 2020, schools plan to open with all these different changes, one being new cleaning protocols, which is understandable. September 14th was her first day of school, and my child went to school with a clean bill of health, including no asthma and no allergies. September 15th, she stayed home because of a staggered start, but the morning she already had a cough. I couldn't believe it. I took her to the allergist. He wanted to see her where a cough ever started again. We were told to once again use the puffers. This after months of no symptoms. Sorry. She went to school for one day and had symptoms again. How can this be? No, it never came to mind before to think about cleaning supplies. But after learning about the new disinfecting practices and reading about Virex and quads, this is starting to make sense. So I asked him if a virus could be causing it. He said cleaning chemicals are irritants. This year already, she's seen her pediatrician, been to the ER, had x-rays, a throat culture, has had mild bronchitis. Virus contains 2 quads, and quads are identified as asthmagens by the Association of Occupational and Environmental Clinics, so they can cause new onset of asthma. There's an exposure code lookup tool on their website by typing the CS number of both quads. It shows that they are both asthmagens. I have provided a copy of that. Quads are also known as to trigger asthma symptoms. In Ontario, we have a Ryan's Law, which states that the school boards are expected to develop strategies that reduce the risk of student exposure to triggers. Ryan Law requires every Ontario school board to introduce policies and procedures that reduce your child's contact with asthma triggers such as cleaning products and scents. People with asthma are recognized as a high-risk group for COVID-19. Choosing safer disinfectants like those that do not contain irritants like quads is important for protecting the high-risk group. Our board is not free of trigger. It has more. My poor child is suffering. School boards should be making every effort to focus on keeping our children healthy and harm health. I'm a very concerned mother, and I keep thinking about these allergists who told me cleaning products can be irritants and about the Ryan's Law. I don't have any other explanation as to why it's happening to her. I have told my concerns to the school who must follow the board protocols. So I have also contacted many on the board in recent, as of last week, and have had no response. This is very frustrating. I am worried about my child. In California, for example, quads are avoided and asthma-safer disinfectants are encouraged. As stated in the reopening plan, I quote, to reduce the risk of asthma and other health effects related to disinfecting programs should select disinfectant products on list N with asthma-safer ingredients like hydrogen peroxide, as recommended by the U.S. EPA Design of Environment Program. Avoid products that contain quads, which can cause asthma. They say it right there, so why are we using quads if they are toxic? And if my child is having expected reactions, I'm sure she is not the only one, and I know many have told their concerns and complaints to the school board office. It's just not me. Please stop using Virex for the sake of our children. It doesn't have to be this way for a child or anyone. There are safer disinfectants to use like Oxivir or others that work are approved too. Please make a change for the health of our children. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Karen. Are there any questions? There are no questions of the speaker. Could you share your speaking points with Madame before she reaches out to you?
Yes.
Thank you. Next up is Mario Spagnuolo. Can you hear us, Mario? Mario, are you there?
Hello there. Can you hear me?
We can now. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees. This evening, I appreciate the opportunity to update the board on the state of education from the perspective of the elementary school teachers. I recently conducted a survey of EXPO members teaching both virtually and in person. First, the overwhelming majority of teachers enjoy their students and indicate that this is the primary reason that they continue to come to school motivated to work. The connection that they have with their students and families drives educators each and every day. The survey showed a desire by elementary teachers to make the best of things, but it clearly highlighted severe challenges. It worries me to see the negative effects the current working conditions are having on mental health and well-being of educators. A majority of our in-school teachers are concerned about large class sizes and crowded conditions where social distancing is impossible. Of those surveyed, over 50 teachers reported their class size was over 25 students. In fact, we have some kindergarten classes that reach 27 students, and remember, these young learners are not wearing masks. Our board also has some junior intermediate classes reaching 28 students when RISE students are integrated for part of the day. As one grade 8 teacher described, there is no room to social distance. After the November reorg, we went from manageable, tight space to no space. We are 30 centimeters apart at best. Aside from the many safety concerns, there are real academic obstacles. The gap in learning is evident, and these kinds of conditions are not conducive to student success. One grade 5 teacher reported the following to me of her class of 26. Even though I have 7 students who have an IEP, 2 more students probably need one, and I'll be asking for an assessment soon. I also have 3 students that I know have social, emotional, and anxiety issues that I deal with on a daily basis. The class sizes in the virtual school are even larger. Teachers in correspondence programs have class lists reaching 33 students, and teachers in cohort C reaching 31 students. Imagine trying to personalize lessons when you can see only 7 or 8 students on your screen at a time via Microsoft Teams. And you thought following a board meeting virtually was a challenge? Come visit the virtual school. Our teachers are stressed, working extended hours and weekends, and more than ever, doing all this while worried about their own health and the health of their families. Burnout is occurring as we speak. All you need to do is speak to our colleagues at GEEP. 80% of teachers have responded to the survey indicating that the current working conditions are impacting negatively their wellness. Morale is low, and with cases of COVID popping up in our schools more regularly, the situation will only worsen. What is most alarming is teachers' feelings of support from the employer. In the middle of a pandemic, where we would expect the system to provide more support than ever, the opposite is true. Approximately 70% of elementary teachers feel less supported this year in comparison to the past. Here is one excerpt from a teacher. I have to clean textbooks between uses because the board gave me 15 books to share between 2 classes with 30 to 40 students. We are told with board improvement plans that we need coaching and need to meet a 10% math score increase this year. There is little to no technology. There is nowhere to eat lunch safely, no phones available to call parents because every room is occupied with virtual teachers and other staff. And curricular expectations have not changed during the pandemic. Students are approximately 6 months behind, but students are expected to reach the same benchmark. There is a disconnect. In addition to not feeling supported, 60% of our in-school teachers do not feel safe in our schools. 90% of these teachers responded that their number one concern is COVID. And the top 3 reasons, class size, lack of social distancing, and non-math students. In addition, many anecdotal comments were made on the PPE and ventilation systems not meeting the recommendation of health experts. While COVID fears are real for our in-school teachers and students, our virtual teachers are not exempt. They report concerns of makeshift working conditions, sharing often cramped quarters with their colleagues because currently working from home is not an option, despite the recommendations from the Windsor-Essex Health Unit made on Friday. I must note that this very suggestion was made to senior administration by all employee groups on October the 7th. The response to the survey was overwhelming, with over 50% of our members responding. With problems come solutions, and yes, they cost money, but the board has money to spend, and it should not be protecting its reserve while teachers and students are being put at risk. Not just physical risk, but social emotional risk as well. Leadership comes from the top. You must first and foremost acknowledge that we are in a pandemic and it's not business as usual. The board must cease micromanaging teachers and trust the professionals who have entered the profession with a strong commitment to students and student learning, who provide care, respect, and concern for children every day. In conclusion, I hope the Board of Trustees will keep this feedback in mind as you plan for our next weeks and months ahead. Our students and education workers deserve no less than a properly funded, safe education system that puts people first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the speaker? Trustee Hatfield?
Yes, thank you, Mario, for your presentation. I just wanted some clarification on what I heard you say about the teachers who are teaching the virtual classes. That I don't know why I just assumed they were teaching it from home, but I guess that's not the case. Is that what you're saying? That the virtual teachers are using all the available spaces in the schools to teach from the schools? Is that what you said?
Yes, thanks for the question of clarification. That's exactly what is happening. Some teachers have been accommodated at home depending on their own medical situation, but other than that, the majority of virtual teachers are teaching from the school. And it's not just that they're one person per classroom. In some cases, we have multiple teachers in one classroom, which is not only a safety concern, but it's also a pedagogical concern because students and teachers can hear each other, and there's a lot of interference on the teams. And for example, some teachers have gone out and purchased their own headphones to try to cut down on the noise level.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Trustee Halberstadt?
Yeah, Mario, you mentioned a lot of things that are wrong, and I probably, people around this table agree with a lot of it. It's obviously not an ideal situation that we're going through, trying to keep our kids healthy and well educated. But what are you expecting the board to do? You mentioned we have to spend more money. I think you mentioned the reserves. We have reserves. But in particular, what would you like to see the board do other than to appeal to the province, which I think has been done, and I'm not sure that would be productive?
Well, thanks for the question, Trustee Halberstadt. I think the first point is using that reserve and giving the green light to senior administration to lower the class sizes in elementary. I think there's a real concern about budget restraint. The other issue is putting more emphasis on mental health and well-being of students and educators. There's a real disconnect between what is happening in the classrooms and what is being expected from above. Many of the teachers that have responded to the survey, and I went through a lot of the anecdotal comments, is just trust us to teach, and we'd like to hear that message on a daily basis. September was very good, where people were very focused on safety measures and putting safety and mental well-being first. But as things have progressed through the year, more and more people are thinking that this is a regular school year, and it's not. We're teaching in a pandemic, and I don't think that that's reflected at all times. I don't know if that gives you an insight of some of the things that we were looking for. There have been a lot of suggestions made through discussions, formal and informal discussions, and we're hoping that there will be movement on that. For example, teaching from home, giving that option would have been a simple fix to some very deplorable working conditions and learning conditions. So that's another one that's an easy fix that could have been done months ago and that other boards have already done, and it costs no money. So those are some examples. The other examples is other school boards are using plexiglass to protect teachers. For example, we're expecting teachers to implement diagnostic testing in our schools, yet when they've asked for plexiglass to protect themselves when they get closer to the kids, especially in the primary grades where they're not masked, the response has been that it was too costly and it's not feasible. So, I mean, if you want to make it so that it's as close as possible to a regular school year, the tools need to be there for our educators to feel safe. And in grades K to 3, the kids are not wearing masks. Yet to do a DRA, you need to be next to that child to listen to them read. So how do you do that while maintaining social distancing? And they're not masked without the plexiglass.
So I'm assuming, Mario, from your words that you're in favor of masks for the primary students?
Absolutely. you could see kids in the community under grades 3 and under that are wearing masks. It's very possible. It's a cultural shift that needs to take place and should have been done from the first day of school, because it'll take longer now to implement the changes. Kids nowadays are used to wearing their masks. It's second nature now, and we could have had that 3 months ago.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you for the question.
Are there any other questions? There's no other questions. If you could share your speaking points with Madame Leboeuf, please.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item L1, drafted audited financial statement for the year end August 31st, 2020. Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have received our draft of the audit statements for the school year that ended August 31st, 2020. You all received a copy. And so therefore I'm going to make the following motion. I'll make it myself. That it be recommended for the approval by the Board of Trustees that the attached audited financial statements of the Greater Essex County District School Board for the year ended August 31, 2020 be approved.
Do I have a seconder? Trustee Cook. Is there any discussion? All in support? Opposed?
Support, Burgess.
It's carried. Moving on to item L2, Trustee Sipkar.
Sure, I'll make the motion. If you get a seconder, I'll speak to it.
So the motion that the Greater Essex County District School Board refer the school council's policy and regulation PAD 03 and RAD 03 to the policy committee for review and amendment is made by Trustee Sipkar and seconded by Trustee Halberstadt. Is there any discussion? Trustee Sipkar.
Sure, I can just quickly speak to it. The reason for the motion is just hearing some feedback from parents that currently with the way that our virtual school is set up, that parents from their home schools are not able to participate in the student or parent council. I think that, I know that the policy was recently looked at and it is in line with ministry standards, but I think it's worth having a conversation at the policy committee level if there's anything that we can do to support parents who want to participate and make sure that our virtual school is properly represented. It's my understanding that they haven't had a parent council meeting either. And so in a time when parents are more involved than ever and more, hands-on with their kids learning, I think that we need to make sure that that policy is supporting them as we move into uncharted territory. So I'm just looking for support so that the policy committee can discuss that.
Trustee Hatfield, you had your hand up?
I did, but Trustee Sipkar just actually answered my question.
Okay, is there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in support? Opposed?
Support, Burgess.
It's carried. Moving on to notice of motion from Trustee Burgess that the Greater Essex County District School Board inform Windsor Essex Student Transportation Services, West, that mandatory masks for all students be considered on all forms of student transportation at all times while emergency measures exist during the COVID-19 pandemic. Trustee Burgess, you'd like to make that motion?
I'd like to move that, Mr. Chair, yes.
Is there a seconder? Trustee Cheen. Trustee Burgess, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you. I'm looking for support for this. Things have evolved now, and we've got several months under our belt as far as actually transporting students and having students in class. I think we heard very passionately from our local president of ETFO about mask wearing in school. What I'm asking for specifically, though, is for transportation. Our buses are fewer than we normally would have. We have double runs in the morning, triple runs in the morning, triple runs in the afternoon. And the logistics of running our transportation system means that students who first board the bus are going to be assured of a clean bus that has been sanitized, etc. But the subsequent runs, the second and third run prior to midday, would not have time logistically for cleaning. I've been told that some bus drivers, while it's not part of their duty, do go through and wipe down and clean their buses in between runs. But again, because of time constraints and it's not part of their job description, it's not expected, so therefore it's not consistent. And because we're getting into times where we're going to be more and more indoors and kids are going to be more bundled up and, we're going to have kind of more surfaces of clothes and masks coming on and off, and we don't have anything saying for our kids who are K-3 to be masked, there's a lot of fomites. In other words, there's a lot of airborne respiratory stuff in the bus, and also it lands on surfaces. So there's a lot of times that the buses aren't cleaned in between runs. We have been told that there is a persistent call out for more bus drivers. We have a shortage. We've been lucky to fill the bus drivers. We've been lucky to fill the positions that we have, but there's a reticence, and specifically because bus drivers tend to be in an age group that has heightened risks, there's a reticence to take the job on, even from drivers who have driven for many years. And this is across all the operators we work with through West. There's a reticence for the drivers to drive this year because they feel that they are in a heightened risk situation when there are so many passengers, so many students that are unmasked in their bus. We can look at the sick kids report that was given to us in the revised report in the middle of the summer, asking for specific distances for physical distancing and to have all the protocols in place so that we can lessen the risks. Buses aren't made to accommodate those protocols. We have generally up to 42 kids on a bus. So the seat behind the driver is kept free, and that is the biggest distance that driver will have to other students. Yes, we do cohort, and yes, we do have, 2 kids on a seat, and we try to give as much distance as possible, but it's impossible to have 6 feet distance between passengers, our students. So we sometimes have buses, in our runs, a child could be on a bus for 10 minutes or it could be an hour, and that's all grades. So the risks go up the longer you are in proximity to somebody, and if you're not masked. Masking a passenger
is now joining.
Will help mitigate some of these risks. In speaking with the folks at West and their operators, they would appreciate it. They would appreciate it that the students are masked when they board the bus. That would give them, their fellow students, but certainly the drivers, more of a safety factor for them. And I think we owe it to them, and we owe it to all the kids to be as protected as possible. I've looked at in our consortia, of course, we have all 4 school boards. Via Monde, which is the French public board, they do have a policy where all students must be masked in their schools. Windsor Essex Catholic District School Board has expressed an interest at the West board table to look at that. But as Greater Essex, we hold the bulk of the usage right now because of the virtual learning, etc. We have fewer passengers, but we still have the higher proportion of that. And having us at the West board table saying we'd like to have this as policy while the pandemic conditions are here would go a long way. So I'm hoping that my colleagues will support this. I think it's the wise thing to do. It's a safe thing to do. I think we also could hear from Mr. Spagnuolo, who said, you know, it becomes second nature once you get used to it. It's a cultural shift, and once you do make that shift, even our youngest learners can use and wear masks without a problem. There is on the Bus Kids website information, lots of frequently asked questions, etc., and a mechanism should someone want a mask exemption. It's been the practice, though, that there hasn't been many requests for exemptions for mask wearing, but that is possible. So if parents don't want their kids of any age to wear a mask, you can't, for a medical reason, etc., then they can make that exception. But I do think that this would make our transportation system much safer and much safer working conditions for our operators. And I'll leave it with that. If anybody has any questions for discussion or debate, I'll entertain that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before I go on to Trustee Seepkar, I just want to note that we have Dr. Ahmed on the phone with us now. If anybody wants to direct a question to him, I think he'd be happy to assist us with this. Trustee Seepkar, and thank you for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for having me.
My question was going to be, is Dr. Ahmed with us? And then we heard him join. And so I guess my question, to put you on the spot, would be, what is the health unit's position on this? And if Dr. Ahmed could speak to that.
So our health unit's position is obviously for the school boards to have a strong recommendation for students coming into attending the school, taking the public transit. And it is still the same, and it hasn't changed.
Okay, Trustee Higginson.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for joining us yet again. You're a very busy man, and your organization is very busy these days, and we thank you very much for dedicating the time to inform us here. And thank you, Trustee Seepkar, for that question. That was going to be kind of my first question. I guess my second question is a build off of that. We know our numbers are rising here. Numbers are rising throughout Ontario. What sorts of data and information do you use, if you were to, and I'm sure that you are constantly re-looking at the protocols that you have and the recommendations that you make regularly to us, what sorts of information do you use and does your organization use when you are looking to make a recommendation? Should there be a change, what sorts of information would inform that change?
So through you, Mr. Chair, when we are looking at the data, we are basically looking at first our local data, but we're also mindful of what's happening across the province and more broadly globally. And we've been monitoring our local situation, and we use a number of indicators to assess the local situation. And community spread, the number of weekly case rates, daily case rates, the distribution pattern, the number of cases that are a result of a direct close contact versus community spread versus travel-related versus any congregate settings such as long-term care home and our agri-farm sector or any workplace outbreaks that we are looking at this time. Those are our, data-driven decisions. And then on top of that, we do have a number of other communication channels with our colleagues across the province, with the different ministries, with different working groups that I and my team are involved in with the province in coming up with some of these recommendations, and that keep us up to date with all the research that's been going on in different areas and the situation that other places are experiencing right now, and some lessons that we are learning from some of the other jurisdictions. In particular, from a school perspective, I do participate in a school working group with many of the medical officers of health in the province. and specifically talking about the school-specific issues that we are seeing. So those are generally our data sources, but it's an ongoing learning process, and we constantly look for new sources of information and better understanding how we can keep our community safe.
Trustee Higginson, supplementary.
Yes, thank you much through you, Mr. Chair, to Dr. Ahmed. Thank you. That was quite comprehensive. I appreciate that. You mentioned two different things, and one was in that long list of things that we look at, or that you look at when you're looking at their policies, direct close contacts, and another is a school working group. I'm wondering if either of those touch directly on busing, whether that be, I mean, right now we're talking about WES and transportation for our students, but some of our students do also take public transit as well to get to school and back. So I'm wondering if either of those, if your direct close contacts and within the school working group have discussed busing specifically.
Well, we do have some conversation, especially in the beginning of this pandemic. And as we recognize, the most important measure that we need to put in place, especially in the bus sector, is to have appropriate physical distancing. And we do recognize that that's the most important measure. But also, on top of that, we are also saying that the bus, everyone who is taking the bus, they should also consider wearing a mask or appropriate face covering with appropriate exemptions, as either from a medical reason or other reasons.
Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is specific to the recommendation, and it's my question would go to administration. So I'm thinking that I'm suffering from a false memory syndrome, because I thought that when we discussed the school opening plans prior to the kids going back to school, I thought it was reported to us that all students would be wearing a mask on the school buses, but I guess that's not the case.
It was recommended in the guidelines to wear on the bus, but it wasn't mandated for students. It wasn't mandatory for students to wear the masks on the bus.
Okay, so my reason for asking that question is because I'm a little bit confused.
Especially K to 3?
Yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Because, you know, I have grandkids in that age group, and some of them do take the bus to school, and they're not allowed on the bus without a mask. Like, they're refused access to the school bus without a mask. So I'm confused on where that mandate comes from. I thought it was from the school board.
Oh, no. It's definitely not the school board. The WES policy in terms of masking is on their website. It might be an individual driver. Potentially that might be requesting that, but it wouldn't be at the direction of WES or the bus operators, because their policy is that students from grades 4 to 12 must wear the mask. So it's hard to respond to that, but it's not required.
Again, as a trustee, I'm having a problem with that too, because the moms were very emphatic that their kids weren't allowed on the bus without a mask. And so and then I'm thinking, well, if it's a bus driver who can mandate that, then as we heard from the mover of the motion, that bus drivers are concerned and would like to see the kids wearing masks, then if they have the authority to mandate it, why aren't they? Because in this case, obviously somebody mandated that the kids couldn't get on the bus without a mask. So for me, there's been some confusion around this about what we're actually doing. So I wanted to get that cleared up. I think I'm still confused in that particular case, because I don't know where that direction is coming from. But anyway, the kids do wear their masks, otherwise they can't get on the bus. And I support the motion. Thank you.
Trustee Sipkar.
Thank you. That was going to be my next set of questions was how do we monitor this, and do we have jurisdiction to mandate that masks are being worn on the bus at all, even if that's what we decide tonight?
that's a challenging question. I'm not sure that we necessarily, boards have done that and have asked particularly for K-3 in schools. With respect to the jurisdiction, I think that's a jurisdiction of public health, and that they have in their guidelines recommended that and that we do that. So that's how I'm seeing it, but that would be the choice of the Board of Trustees.
I do have a supplemental to that then to Dr. Ahmed. More broadly in society, are children from the age of JK to 3, are they required to wear masks to enter other establishments anywhere, like elsewhere outside of schools?
So as you know that we still have our Section 22 order in the region that requires masking for all children under the age, over the age of 5, anyone who's over the age of 5. But we know that even for children, the enforcement is not as great as we can see. But the challenge is when you're talking about these public places or grocery stores or retail stores and all those places, those are all people are going by choice versus coming to school to attend, and the requirement and the recommendations for students. That's why it's there. But overall, yes, for the retail stores outside, we do have the language to recommend anyone who is over the age of 5.
Just have one more. So on that note, then, if we were to pass a motion like this tonight, would it be the health unit that would therefore enforce that in our schools? I know you said that it's not as enforced, but I'm just curious as to who's enforcing this and where do we have jurisdiction?
Through the chair, Trustee Sipkar, I think it would end up being the bus drivers, and it would end up being people in schools. I mean, I guess, would they just not let them on the bus? I guess that would be the decision. I'm looking to Superintendent Armstrong, but that I would think.
Yeah, I would agree with Director Kelly. It would ultimately be the bus driver who would refuse to allow the students to board the bus if they were not wearing a mask, or unless they had a medical exemption from needing to wear a mask.
Trustee Halberstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, sorry, I want to walk you back, Dr. Ahmed, to the comment you made there a few speakers ago that your position hasn't changed. Could you maybe clarify and refresh me on the reason for not requiring masks for the younger children? I guess either on a bus or in the schools.
So I think we'll have to just take that question one by one. So for the buses, we do have that broad recommendation. It does not differentiate who we're talking about. And if we're switching gears to talk about in general, that's I think part of a broader recommendation that we had some discussion even earlier on this year about masking and younger children.
Trustee Sartori.
Thank you. Just wondering, were the motion to pass tonight at this board, what are the next steps? So in my understanding, there would need to be a recommendation from all 4 boards. I believe the Catholic board has already supported younger students wearing masks on buses. And then I would also like to know when it would potentially come into effect and what the communication to parents would look like.
Mr. Chair, for point for information.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Two of the boards have already expressed that they would like to have all students of all grades, so including K to 3, which is now not mandatory under recommendations. So Viamonde and Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board already support the idea of wearing masks for all students, requiring mandatory masks for all students. However, because of the governance of West, it's all 4 boards, plus I think John McGivney for that matter, and we would hold the weighted vote. If you look at the motion says that mandatory masks for all students be considered on all forms of student transportation at all times. It's considered at a West's meeting, and the next West's meeting is this month. So it would have to be determined at West, and our recommendation for all masking would put it over the overwhelming majority. So it would be mandatory on buses for for all of our riders and for the majority of the things. I don't know if Providence would exempt themselves. I don't think that's how that goes. I think that they would probably have to fall in line as well.
So
as
for
far as next
clarification, there is no weighted vote in West. Each member board carries a vote.
Right. The weighting is the funding.
But that doesn't deal with the governance structure.
Right.
So did that help, Trustee Sartori?
And then my other question was, how would it ultimately be communicated to parents?
I guess that would be the responsibility of WES, as they're the board, that would be doing that. So it would be their decision and their communication, I would suspect. And of course, we would put reminders if that was the communication.
Trustee Cook.
Thank you. I get the drift of this motion, and I understand all that. My concern is the implementation of this. And the responsibility that we're putting on the drivers. When kids are on the bus, the only adult on that bus is a driver. So we're asking the driver to make sure everybody has their mask on, make sure that they're wearing it properly, and drive the bus and get our kid there safely. And if a kid is at the door trying to get on the bus and doesn't have a mask, then what happens? I just don't know how much responsibility we want to give the drivers. And like, if there's parents there and we're sorry your kid can't come on because they're not wearing a mask, I don't know what this is all going to look like. And that's just a little bit scary for me. Not saying I'm not going to support, I just don't know what we're getting into.
Trustee Cheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since Dr. Ahmed is here, I want to ask some questions regarding the masks. And I know that there are over 3,500 in the province, in the school. There is key children, they suffered the virus. And it's kind of more serious than we thought at the beginning of the semester. So, and also I heard that Chief Health Officer of Canada has already increased the requirement of the masks. She suggested to use the 3-layer masks instead of the common mask as before. So I wonder if the Dr. Ahmed has any, suggestion regarding the current situation of the pandemic, and if it's better to have a more serious, taking more serious action to handle the risk. Thank you.
Dr. Ahmed, are you able to answer that?
Sure, I'll try to answer as best as I can. So I think the first part is I would not say that we appreciated or I guess we considered that the risk was low. We still feel that right from the beginning of the pandemic that yes, it's a deadly virus and it's killing people around the world. So we know that, and I think with more and more evidence of how it's transmitted and how what works and what doesn't work. So I think those information continue to enrich us with in managing this pandemic. The second part of your question, I think there is no doubt in my mind and in anyone's else's mind in terms of the from a source control perspective that masks are effective and it does work. And what our recommendation, I think it's more of an operational issue, what we're talking about. So our recommendation has always been there, whether we're talking about little children versus older adults. I think the recommendations are there. The logistical challenge of how you are implementing it and how you are providing that support to all the different age groups and the different high-risk population, I think that's the key thing. So our position was, again, from a risk perspective, we do recognize that the risk is there and it should be, and that's why the recommendation is there. But having said that, it's the position and our recommendation based on Dr. Tan's suggestion. I don't think that it made any difference, but obviously, yes, it did emphasize the importance of having masks.
I have Trustee Hatfield and then Trustee Sartori.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just back specifically to the motion, what I'm supporting is that our board is asking transportation services to consider this as part of running the bus system. We're not setting it as a mandate for our students, so that the motion isn't speaking to that. So what we're doing is we're just voting on sending this suggestion to the transportation services for them to consider. And I'm sure that in their consideration, with all the members at the table, all the representatives of all the school boards are going to have to be considering how they would implement it, what the logistics would be, how they would notify the parents and all of that. But this motion isn't for us to mandate that all our students have to wear a mask. So I just wanted to know that I'm reading this and interpreting it correctly.
From the mover, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would like to say to the previous questioner that her interpretation is correct. The way it's worded, it is for our representative at West, who is Superintendent Armstrong, to take our recommendation that masks be considered. We want it strengthened. All students wear masks, to bring that to the West board table, and it's for them to determine. In my first speaking to the motion, I mentioned that in consultation with the operators and the manager of West, it was very clear to me that it would be appreciated if this came forward, because it would support them in the health and safety of their employees, the operations. They would figure out the logistics of it, and in fact, it would help retain and recruit bus drivers, because the ones that have are reticent may in fact return if they know that everyone on the bus is masked. So it is for them, the Board of West, to consider, but our representative, Superintendent Armstrong, would take the clear message that we would prefer to have masks, but it would be a West decision. They're a standalone corporation. They determine that.
Thank you. Trustee Sartori?
Mr. Chair, this is Trustee Olmstead. When Trustee Sartori is done, may I ask a question? I hate to interrupt, but I do have a question.
I do have you up next. I'll let Trustee Sartori. Trustee Cook gave me a signal that you do have a question. You're up next.
Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if she saw the text.
No problem. It's appreciated. You can enter in anytime you like when you're on the phone, because it's hard for us to see you waving.
True story.
Okay, you're up next, Amy. Can I just understand from admin what the situation is like on the buses? So there was a number suggested tonight that there are 42 kids on a bus, or can be. up to maybe 42 kids on a bus. And I'm also curious if we have any information on, I believe the communication out to parents right now, at least from the board, and maybe that's just in classrooms, that younger students are encouraged or can wear masks, but it's not mandatory. I'm wondering what the uptake is on that. You know, do we have very few children that that are coming to school with masks in the younger grades voluntarily, or is it a high number?
With respect to your first question, the occupancy on the bus would be anywhere from 22 to 42 students. So it just depends. If a child has a sibling, if there's students that are siblings, they will sit together on a bench on the bus. If a student is in a classroom cohort with another individual, they'll sit together. But if that doesn't meet the criteria, then the student would sit alone on the bench. So that's where you get the range from. I can't honestly answer your question about how many students from JK to 3 are coming to the bus without a mask. I can't. We do have masks that are available for other students should they forget, but I can't answer that question.
Trustee Olmsted, and then Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little removed from the meeting, but I'm sitting here really confused. We're in the midst of a second wave, and we know cases are rising, and we also know that it's pretty tough on a school bus to maintain the recommended 2-meter social distancing recommendations by the health unit. So my question is to both Dr. Ahmad or senior administration. Are there any reasons whatsoever why we should not make such a suggestion to West that all students who ride on a school bus, regardless of age, are asked to wear masks, not only for their own safety, but for the safety of others? Are there any valid reasons why we should not be making this suggestion? Because from our vantage point, any child above 2 or under 5 is required or asked to wear one in any other public place. So why would they not wear one on a school bus?
Dr. Ahmed, did you want to take a shot at that question?
Okay, so I'll start from our perspective. So again, reiterating our stance that yes, we do recommend everyone to wear a mask, and the challenge is, as you can imagine, that every child is different, and them wearing and following these recommendations is also different. So I think the challenge is then who is enforcing it and how they're enforcing it. Like, my 2-year-old, he can wear a mask, probably not an issue. But a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, if they don't want to wear it, how they will keep it intact and who's monitoring it. So if you're in any setting, if they start to just pass this around and then just the teacher and whoever is enforcing it is that something that we want them to do. So the recommendation is there. In terms of it's more of the logistics, and in terms of the likelihood of how likely it would be adapted. And if more and more people, more and more students and younger children are willing to wear it, it's great. We support that. But I think when it comes to making it a requirement and mandatory, we feel that it would be it would vary depending on setting to setting. So that's why the responsibility, we feel that based on the situation, it can be assessed on that basis.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Does administration have anything to add?
I think those would be similar ideas from administration. Recommended, but difficult to implement and
Trustee Higginson.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm torn on this one, and I really appreciate Dr. Ahmed coming on. We're taking our advice throughout this pandemic from public health. While we all have our own personal anecdotes to add to what we may change or what we may not, and Dr. Ahmed alluded to this as well, and I appreciated it when we talk about when young children are masked in a store, it is a voluntary place for them to go. And when students are taking a bus, I assume in some cases it is voluntary and in some cases it is not. This seems innocuous, right? We're just sending a recommendation to a board that's going to ultimately make a decision, and to Trustee Cook's point, is ultimately going to do the enforcement. So for us, it seems pretty hands-off. Sure, we can recommend it. We're pretty much just strengthening the language from the health unit is one way to look at it. The other is to say that we, as a board, are recommending a little bit of an overstep on what West is already taking into account with their recommendation. And what West is currently doing is trusting public health. It's what we're doing in our outbreak plan. It's what we're doing in our contact tracing. It's what we're doing in our school reopening plan. And for me, if we trusted it then, and if we are going to say that we put our faith in public health to get us through this pandemic, then us overstepping that at this point, to me, is problematic. We are not public health experts. We are here, as I've said before, to protect the health and safety of our kids. That's why this is a tough one for me. I unfortunately don't think I'm going to be able to support it, because overall, I do trust the advice of public health. I think West is doing their best to trust the advice of public health here. And while I can absolutely empathize, and I really appreciate the discussion that's gone on tonight, really great questions for everybody, it's just where I'm at this point. I can't support it for those reasons.
Okay, so we've been around the table, and I'm getting to the point where I'd like to call the question. I just want to...
Speak last, Mr. Chair, if you have something to say, but I'd like to speak last to it, please.
I do have something to say, and I will give you the last opportunity. I agree with most of what Trustee Higginson has said, but my position is a little bit different. I'm not torn. I'm not torn at all. I think that it's quite clear that we have a recommendation that's from public health. I support the guidance from public health. I am very concerned about any interpretation of what the word mandatory might mean, because what I envision is a bus driver leaving an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old at the side of the road with no parent because the child doesn't have a mask on. That terrifies me. I see that as a headline in the Windsor Star and on CBC. Dr. Ahmed made it quite clear that we have a recommendation, and West is following that recommendation. There's been no change in the guidance from public health in terms of that recommendation, so therefore I will stand by public health, and I can't support this. One of the things that really worries me is I don't know how many of you have dealt with West for bus stops. Not a pleasant situation, because they're hard and fast on rules. So if we put in something, or if we make if we ask them to consider mandatory, and they implement mandatory, they're going to enforce mandatory, and we're going to have parents calling saying their kids couldn't get on the bus, or that worst case scenario that I just talked about tonight. We have a recommendation. If the parents think their children can get away with it, or are able to wear a mask, they'll put a mask on the child. We have older kids that are required to wear masks, and those kids are wearing those masks. I think what we have in place is suitable. I just cannot support this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question for Dr. Ahmed as well, and it's interesting without the benefit of being physically in the room and whatever. And Dr. Ahmed, you might be on the phone, I'm not sure, but it's I heard something different. I heard something supportive, that it's highly recommended that all kids wear masks. They're not going as far as mandatory because they're not, and other health units aren't either. However, I want to say that this is not precedent. This is being done at other boards.
Karen Donnell is now exiting.
I also want to say that I heard words like, "This is really scary," that I'm terrified, that I'm really worried. I really want to make sure that everyone understands that the conversations I had and I've had in putting this motion together are really speaking with the folks at West and the operators, et cetera. This supports them in their work. I do not underestimate them. I'm not worried about them delivering the logistics of this at all. I'm not terrified or worried or scared that they're capable of driving safely and maintaining decorum, and that if they maintain the cleanliness if they want to, in addition, ad hoc way, maintaining all the protocols. I'm not worried or terrified by that. I support them in their work. Our bus drivers deal with kids K-3 all the time whose behavior, as we know, can vary. And they have to maintain decorum. They're not going to be mask police any more than they police every single thing that every child does on the bus. But if it's for safety, they're going to make sure that somebody's not running up and down the aisle, that they're seated, that they stay in their seat. They maintain that safety. If somebody's going to come on, I heard very clearly today that if somebody comes on and they forgot their they forgot their mask, and they're identified as a student in grade 4 to 12, there are extra masks there. So there's not going to be a concern that should somebody forget it, or that it fell off at the bus stop and got, fell into the slush, of the snow that's in the, or whatever, that there will be something there. No bus driver is going to stop and say, "Oh, you don't have a mask, it fell, and there's a kid at a bus stop, and they're not going to let them on." That's not going to happen. This is a motion that the mandatory masks for all students be considered on all forms of student transportation. Wests will determine that. They are looking for support for this. This is to support Wests in their safe transportation of our students. It's to support student health, our staff, etc., once they get to school, because they're in buses that have double, triple runs. 6 runs a day, only cleaned midday. This is to support student health, staff health. We also heard earlier that kids get used to it. They do. It becomes second nature to them. I think I hear a lot of people. I'm surprised that we're underestimating our fabulous bus drivers. They want this. They want this for their safety. They want this to keep them and everybody on the bus safe. Why wouldn't we make a safe working condition? I heard that it's difficult to keep 2 meters apart. It's impossible. You can't do it on a bus. We try our best. What I heard was we probably get 3-4 feet in between kids at the maximum. And if we have buses that are, some students are there for an hour because of, they're traveling a long distance to a program-related bus, et cetera, a program-related thing physically at a school, for example. That's a long time to be in a position where somebody has been unmasked and left their aerosol behind or sitting next to you. So I would like you to really think about this as supporting student health and well-being, supporting our staff health and well-being. It does not contravene the health unit's recommendations for all kids to have masks. It's suggested and recommended. So why don't we offer this as what we'd like to see at West and have West determine how they're going to do it. It was not considered in any way difficult. I also want to go back to, there was a time, if you remember, we changed the protocol for musical instruments on buses because a lot of parents were concerned that their students couldn't take buses and couldn't take their band instruments on buses, et cetera, and it was stopping their practice sessions, et cetera. And it was determined by West to let go of that policy for some time. Now, musical instruments and COVID pandemic don't exactly mix these days, so that's kind of moot. But the point is they're receptive to change, and they're receptive to making things work if it's best for students. We know the efficacy of mask wearing. We've heard from the health unit and from every directive that mask wearing reduces and lowers the risk of transmission of this disease. Why would we not support that? Leave it to parents. If parents feel strongly that their child suffers from some anxiety, some reticence, some medical position, whatever, they get the little rubber tag and they put it on their child's backpack, and the bus driver lets that kid on without a mask. There's no downside to this.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question. Just before I do call the question, it's been raised that I don't have my mask on all the time. I do move it up and down. I am more than 6 feet away from the closest person to me, and I am using a microphone, and I'm trying to make sure that people can hear me clearly. So I don't think I'm putting anybody at risk by having the mask down when I am speaking. I will call the question. All in support of the motion.
Support Burgess.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Support Olmsted.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? That carries. Moving on to the report of the Director of Education.
Thank you very much. Or have some slides coming up, I think. Okay, since we began this school year, the focus has often been on things we have not been able to do due to restrictions inherent within reducing the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm pleased that our students, staff, and school communities have taken their responsibilities very seriously, and the virus has not...
Dr. Vajadema
is now exiting.
Okay. In part because we've made an effort to maintain physical distance, wash hands, wear masks, and other PPE. It's unfortunate this school year might be remembered for what maybe we didn't do. But I think there are many things that we've been able to do, and those things will be the true measure of our success this year. For example, we were able to commemorate Remembrance Day in our schools, as we always do. Maybe not the way we usually do, but we adapted, and there was an emphasis this year on art, poetry, and individual expressions of respect and admiration for Canada's veterans. Art was also a major part of Treaties Recognition Week in our schools, with a number of opportunities to work online with Indigenous artists and scholars to learn about why treaties are important. Last week, we celebrated the Enhanced Construction Program that we run in partnership with Carpenters Local 494. I was pleased to be able to join MPP Rick Nichols at the Training Centre to talk about the investment from the Ontario Skills Catalyst Fund. One thing we are doing a lot more of this year is learning outdoors. Students of all grades have been able to improve their environmental IQs this year because of the pandemic. We are still able to enjoy the support of community partners this year. And at Hetherington Public School, the local Optimist Club made a generous donation to the breakfast program. The Deer Run Church made a $5,000 donation to the student nutrition program at Leamington District Secondary School. It's the 6th straight year that we have done so. And at Westgate Public School, the Knights of Columbus contributed support to the student nutrition program, something that they've been doing for 30 years in the community. Students at the Kingsville District High School Tech Zone surprised the Kingsville Fire Department by coming through with 3 Palmer's doll houses, which are training tools for firefighters. The order was placed before the initial COVID-19 shutdown in March, and the fire department didn't think they'd be getting them. Our reorganization, challenging, but was as smooth as we had hoped, with hundreds of students changing their learning programs, adding to some classes, taking away from other classes, and at A.V. Graham class, they were reformed outside before going into the classroom. We were able to honor Bullying Prevention and Intervention Week in our schools, as always, and that's happening this week. Schools are emphasizing the important role individual students play in promoting safe, inclusive learning environments. And last Friday, we celebrated the start of construction at the new high school in Amherstburg. Trustee Leclerc and I were joined by Mayor Aldo DiCarlo, students and staff from General Amherst and Western Secondary Schools, and the folks from Fortis Construction to mark the occasion at the site of Simcoe Street, and the job should be done by the summer of 2022. As this is our last official meeting of the year, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the trustees for their leadership this year, and particularly to Vice Chair Cook and Trustee Ron Leclerc for navigating with us a challenging year, and we have sincerely appreciated the support that you've been able to provide for the senior team and our system at large. So thank you very much for your leadership. And that ends the director's report.
Thank you, Madam Director. Are there any questions for the Director? Seeing none, we'll move on to the long-term accommodation report. Superintendent Awander, do you want to speak to it? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have a brief presentation for you. It's just going to be an overview of the report that you've received. And so I will go, it's everything that is on the slides here will be in your report, just separated so it lays it out for you. So always the purpose is around supporting student learning and achievement, and it's based on the strategic priorities. So we always tap into the census data. This is a little bit old because it's the last one we had. This was 2016. There will be another one coming up. And the interesting thing is the last few years, I don't know if back in 2016 they could have predicted what's actually happened. So we have everything that's happened this year. We've also had a number of newcomers come in over the last few years, and it seems to have sort of settled down in that regard. You can see that over time, it has gone up a little bit to the 2016. It started to go back up in the total population. However, the thing to remember about that is that with that total population, and you'll see on this next slide, the group that is going up the most are the 65 and over. And obviously, for school systems, that isn't necessarily the demographic that we're looking for. So that's each one of the subdivisions. So this is some important information for us. 5-year renewal costs are still high with our board. They're at $463 million. The average board-wide facility condition index is 32.2, which actually is not too bad. It has gone down significantly over the last, I'm going to say, 8 years or so. And there's a very promising slide later on that'll touch on this too. And then the average of our aging infrastructure is 49 years, which is still one of the highest in the province. So the ministry completed a 5-year school assessment cycle back in 2015. They're on their second round right now, and the individuals that do that are independent third-party facility assessors with their 2 engineers specializing in building design and then construction and building systems. So this is an impressive number, helped us out tremendously. This is the amount of money we've received since 2015-16. And we have our renewal that we've typically received every year for the last number of years, which is usually around the $6 million mark. But since the 15-16 year, they've added the SCI, which is the school condition improvement, And because of that, we've been able to make extremely wonderful improvements to many of our schools across the system. And so 162 million isn't bad. Just like to show some pictures in here of the beautiful facilities that we have. This is the lobby, the office on the left there, the library, and the cafeteria straight ahead at Leamington District High School. Secretary. And I wanted to throw in a few of the pictures of some of our new schools. So it's actually a beautiful picture from overhead there with the water in the background, the park. This is Legacy Oak Trail that's going to take over for the Prince Andrew School. And we have the Vollmer Complex, which is right to the right there, and right beside that is Sandwich Secondary. So here's our overall system, both elementary and secondary with the spaces. We have an on-the-ground capacity, and it's been said before that the on-the-ground is just the permanent structures. It does not count portables. It does not count porta-packs as far as the capacity goes. We have 24,700 students approximately. We have 11,600 in the secondary with an on-the-ground of 14,000 approximately. And the total capacity is where you take the on-the-ground with the portables and with the porta-packs and get that total. However, when you figure out the utilization rate, that does not take into account portables and porta-packs. So you see that our empty spaces are around 2,400 in elementary and approximately 2,600 in secondary. That is down a little bit. So secondary enrollment did decrease a little bit from last year. Elementary did decrease a little bit as well. So this is a visual I'd like to put in. The total in our system right now is 5,000 empty spaces. We have 2,600 in secondary, which is the equivalent of 2 General Amherst, and we have 2,400 in elementary, which is 4 Anderton Public Schools. This picture is from probably about 5 years ago or so. I like to include it because some of the facilities were in this type of condition. So this is actually a science lab previously over at Herman and in the secondary school. And you can see that it's not even usable. That's not a learning environment for the kids. So the new build reduction, this is the promising slide I was talking about. We have 7 projects on the go right now. And once these are all built, they're going to help further reduce the empty spaces across the system. So 5,000 approximately right now. Once these are built, there's going to be 1,645 fewer, which gives us a total as a system as 3,362, which is actually, it's actually pretty good for a system to have that few empty spaces. So these are what the science labs should look like. We have one at Westview and one over at Herman. This is a chart that we use, and it's the facility condition index versus utilization. You can see the 4 different quadrants. The top left one is where we do not want to be. The bottom right is where we do, the good condition and high enrollment. So this is a telling map as well over the past 8 years or so, 7, 8 years. You can see that there's a lot that are shifted up into the top left quadrant, and the bottom right has some, but not a lot. So just have a look here. When I flick this over to the next slide, you're going to see a big shift with all of our schools moving toward the area that we want them to be. So you can see they've clumped way down. That shows that our FCI, even with renewal and so forth, we're doing better with our schools. And I guess I'd like to point out, when you look at the very top there, you can see Giles, and we know Giles won't be here in a little bit. We also know that Kingsville District and Kingsville Public, which are both up there, are going to be consolidating into the new K-12. D'Amigal is the top right in the yellow quadrant, and that won't be here because it's going to be the new Tecumseh area school. And then you can see Western and General Amherst on the left in the pink quadrant there. They're both low enrollment, starting to move up. So again, they won't be there either. So you can see that it's, with these new builds, it's even going to be a greater shift down to the bottom right quadrant. Had to take a picture of James L. Dunn. This is phase 2. It is going to be an absolutely beautiful school. It's going to be extremely unique. If you've not gone by, please do. The windows are outstanding, and there's going to be great light coming in. And so here's an example of Queen Victoria. This is what it looked like in the summer. So this is where our school condition index, that $162 million, this was being done at Queen Vic to make it a better school as far as the structure goes. Inside, all the lockers have been ripped out, so it's looking really good. And same thing, Prince Andrew was in the same situation where it was all dug up around there. So they've been doing a lot of work on each one. And there's many more. Hugh Beaton is another one that a lot of work was done on too. And now this is getting into the actual family of school profiles. So each family of school, you can see the secondary feeder boundaries on the left, and then you can see the total enrollment versus capacity for all of the schools combined in this particular slide in the bar graph. And then here are the family of school profiles with all of them as far as the enrollments go and the projections, and then as well as the utilization of all three plus the total at the end. In here, there's also a narrative to the story, and in the narrative, there's potential development that's talked about. There's some history of the individual schools. You can see some of the numbers as far as FCI, renewal, empty space, over capacity, anything that may be unique about the school, any potential boundary or program adjustments. Then you go into the individual elementary school profile. So each school has the enrollment for the 2021 year. The on-the-ground capacity, it talks about it being over and under as well as the utilization. And again, this is for every single school. So it gives you a little bit of the history of it as well as the future. We take a picture of all the schools, put it in there so everybody has an idea what they look like, and then we have all of the school profile information for each one. And you can see it has certain, like the program that's there, whether it's a JK to 8, if there's portables, is it accessible? It has the renewal cost, FCI, childcare, and when it was built. And again, each individual school has the bar graph. It's a nice visual. And then it also has the catchment area. This is the high school. The same goes for the high schools as the elementaries. You have the picture. You have the school profile information. You have the individual secondary school profile for each of the schools with the on-the-ground enrollment and over-under capacity as well as utilization. And again, the secondary bar graph as well as the secondary catchment area for each individual school. And then we move into the French immersion. As we know, that's been growing over the years in our board. And it looks at the enrollment trends both in elementary and secondary. It looks at the boundaries for both. It also has different models of delivery from across the province. And then it talks about possible new FI sites and or boundary changes. And I always make sure that everybody understands that it's possible. It doesn't mean it's happening, but it's possible. Just ideas. I just wanted to note 18.3% of the overall elementary population is FI. It went down a little bit this year, but it's typically been going up every year. Interestingly, the secondary actually went up, so that one went up this year. And it's actually, so as our population over about the past 10, 12 years has declined overall, even though it's come up a little bit the last few years, the French immersion has still doubled in that period of time. And then each one of the French immersion schools for elementary and secondary, it shows the catchment area, and it shows all of the English boundary schools that feed into it. So if, for example, Eastwood did not, if the students that were going to Forest Glade French for the program, living in the Eastwood catchment area, if they did not want the French program, they would be back at Eastwood in the English. And the same goes for Parkview, Roseville, and A.B. Graham. It talks about the number of the French enrollment, French immersion enrollment. It talks about the English enrollment. It talks about the total enrollment, and then it gives the percentage of French immersion that is in the building. And the same for the secondary. It mentions partnerships, and actually we have a community partnership meeting coming up. I believe it's December 3rd. We have them every year, We also meet with the municipalities on a regular basis. We meet with organizations on a regular basis. We try to see if there's a good fit for any kind of partnership in our schools. And if there are, we go through the process and try to work it out. And just wanted to put a picture of Leamington District. It's always a beautiful school with the lights on in the big lobby. And that's our newest high school that's been built. This is nice too. The future new school projects. We have James L. Dunn, General Amherst Western, the K-12 Kingsville, the North Shore area, Legacy Oak Trail, Eastwood Parkview consolidation, the Queen Elizabeth addition, and the Essex Public School childcare that will be ready right after the Christmas break. I wanted to remind everybody as well that the capital priorities awaiting are the Forest Glade and the PLC combining so that we have a new JK-8 school on the site. So it's just one building. The Lakeshore Bell River School, we would prefer a new school that is between the two because of the accommodation pressures. The same goes for Westgate Northwood, a school in between those to alleviate the pressures there. Talbot Trail in addition, Gosfield North, a replacement on the same site, and part of the reason there are the Porta Pack. MD Benny is growing. The IB program is definitely helping it out, and in addition to that building, and then as well Marlborough potential replacement because of the age, and it does have a nice property for it. And up for questions.
Thank you, Trustee Sartori.
Thank you. So as you know, I really appreciate this report. I think it gives us a really good overview of what's happening across the board.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know you were instrumental in getting it to be 175 pages.
Whatever I can do. I didn't see any specific recommendations in the report, and we're not being asked to vote on anything tonight, but I'm just wondering when or if admin would planning on bringing recommendations forward, and if we could have a hint of what that might look like.
Yeah, and there's specifically there's not anything specific in there because they're all just ideas. And so as far as accommodation reviews go, those aren't taking place right now. So school closures, there's a moratorium on them, I believe. Still, there hasn't even been the new policy that's been written about it yet, or the memorandum to come out about that. As far as boundary adjustments go, there's a number that are alluded to in the narrative with some of those schools, and so those are the areas that we would look into, and we would prioritize.
Thank you. Yeah, I did see that what I thought was the only language, maybe it's just the place that it jumped out at me where we needed to do something immediately. It was on page 68 talking about some of the schools, maybe all of the schools, over capacity in South Windsor that need to be addressed, quote unquote, immediately. So I'm just wondering about timelines on that, and again, what admin might have in mind, and especially because we're in COVID right now, right? And there's still lots of virtual school happening, and I'm just wondering how that might figure into the thinking too.
Yeah, so in that particular area, the majority of actually all of the schools are almost at or going to be at in the near future capacity. And so the immediacy there is with Northwood and with Talbot Trail. And so what we've put up there for the potential priorities that are awaiting that we would submit to the ministry is that new school between Westgate and Northwood to help those pressures, specifically Northwood, and the addition to Talbot Trail. So that's what the immediacy was.
Just one last thing. And then so in the case of Northwood and Westgate, those two schools would still exist, but there would be another one kind of in between is what you're
Exactly.
thinking?
That's the business case.
Thank you.
Trustee Higginson.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. I always love getting these things and trying to compare them over the year of what was in the last one. And when I was doing that this year, I realized that after all this time, I still am having trouble with some of the determinations and some of the numbers that go into it. So I'm hoping you can help me out. And maybe if I'm having trouble from the inside, maybe the public is also having some trouble trying to figure out. And it's complicated. So I'm wondering how we come to a determination of what we consider on-the-ground capacity and utilization, and then which decisions we make based off of those. And the example that I had in my head is, and we alluded to it just in the question beforehand, we make those decisions on boundary changes and portables and consolidations and those kinds of things. Is there a threshold number that we look for in order to kind of trigger that process? As we were kind of alluding to that a little bit, how do we reach that threshold number? What numbers go into those utilization and capacity rates to reach that threshold number, and then what goes into that calculations? Is it rooms? Is it just classrooms? Is it teaching space? I think we've talked about that maybe once or twice before, and I'm just trying to wrap it all together.
Yeah. So it's not anything specific. Like there's a number of factors that go into it, and so what we look at. I'll give you an example. Queen Victoria was up there under the construction and so forth. They're under capacity right now based on the numbers the ministry gives us, the number of rooms, and even though they're under capacity, we couldn't do anything with them right now because at most next year, if their population stays the same and everybody's back in the building, they don't have any room. They would have one room, and with one room you can't do any kind of adjustment. It won't make the difference that's needed to be made. As far as the numbers go, the ministry has a 23-to-1 and a 21-to-1 ratio for high school and elementary. And so every one room would be 23. Another regular classroom that's 700 square feet or more would be another 23-to-1, so 23 students fit in there. And so you just add up all of those classrooms. Then you take, you may have an LST room that is a 400 square foot classroom. The ministry rates that, I believe, at, I want to say the number is 12. And then we also have programs that may be in a regular classroom size, but if it's, let's say, a gains or steps room, it's rated not at the 23, but it's rated at the, Mike, I want to say 10? 10. Then it'd be rated at 10, which would be the maximum for that. So that's how the on-the-ground capacity is determined with all of the schools. Then we just take the actual population of the school and we divide it by the on the ground, and that gives us the utilization rate.
I'm gonna watch that back on YouTube later, so I could really get it.
And I have no problem showing you.
Thank you. So and I'm glad that you brought up Queen Vic. Actually, it was one of the things that I was looking at that I was thinking about. Like they just had all these beautiful renovations, and then if all those students come back to that school and they are listed as under capacity, but we pretty much have to put a portable there if we had any population growth to that school. Am I correct in that?
Well, it's really difficult to say, and I say that because any given year you can have an influx of students or not. It could go the opposite way as well. And so what's happened with the Queen Victorias, the Bagleys, the Prince Edwards, the last, excluding this year, but about the last 2 to 3 years, approximately 3 years, we have had a huge influx of newcomers that we were not expecting. And so they literally, Prince Edward went up, I think, 150 students. Queen Vic went up 80 students. Bagley went up about 50 or 60 students. So they really started to soar, and they became very full. Before that, they had been declining every year, and there was no sign of something happening overseas like it did, and then a number of newcomers coming across the border and then settling here in Windsor. And so difficult to say. The other factors that go into it are when we do, I'll use the elementary staffing, for example, you could actually go up students, but you could go down classrooms. It just depends on where they fall, because we have class size caps, we have averages, and then we have kindergarten averages. And then we also have potentially a gains room, we have rise rooms, LST, so all of that factors in. And some of those could be lost if those needs aren't there, and some could be added if more needs come into the building.
So just one more thing. Thank you for that explanation about the kind of especially with those kind of collection of schools there. Because I was thinking about some of the numbers that go in, and you alluded to the census numbers and that they're like a little old at this point. But that's what we have to go on. And so, I mean, those schools, some of those schools were going to be closed, and then we had this huge explosion of people. What other sources of data can we reflect on when we're making these projections out? So if we reverse back in time and had closed those schools, and then we have all of this influx of people to come in, would there have been, not necessarily would there have been a way for us to know that, but is there, or would there have been a way for us to know that, to get data from other places other than the census that is updated more frequently, or that is kind of projecting outward as well, that would allow us to make those kinds of decisions with a little more using the kind of methodology that we have here, and then also in putting those things that would be able to allow longevity and kind of sustainability to those decisions?
Yeah, and so with the census is a little bit old, and so that we don't base it just on that. We have to look at the factors. So we did not know 5 years ago or 6 years ago that the influx of newcomers was going to happen. The expert consultants that we use that do this for a living, do it for a number of the boards across the province, do it for municipalities. On the municipalities that we talk to, we look at the housing developments and we make sure we have that to incorporate into our numbers that we do. We have Behringer software that does tie into the census, but it gets the local knowledge from myself, knowing the schools around here and what's happened over the years with the accommodation reports, but also we look school specifically and talk to the people in the schools to find out what the trends have been over the years as well, so that a lot of the times the people have been there for a number of years and they have a really good grasp on what the trends are looking like. And so we look at it from a bigger picture, and then we go specifically to the schools and look at it too, to get that local knowledge.
If I could just add to that, we also look at the school condition, right? So like Queen Victoria, those schools now, there has been a lot of money put into those schools now to get them up to the level which they weren't at the time we did discuss them before. So just to note that.
Trustee Sipcar and then Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess going off those questions there, I'm wondering if you could just give me a sense, and I know Trustee Sartori mentioned it, but of the history of this report and kind of the how it came to be and the intention for trustees, and I guess just so we really understand that why we're receiving it.
So when I took over the role, I basically looked at what my predecessor did and followed that report. We did make changes over the years to it. It was not this big, but it was, I'm going to say 50 or 60 pages when it first started, and there was a little bit of different information in here. We then condensed it to be smaller, and then the recommendation was that, I think we basically asked, what would you like to see? And so all of this came out. And so what I did was I looked at a number of these reports across the province, and I tried to take the best features of many of them and try to incorporate it in here, and then organize it so that it was visually appealing and hopefully as easy as possible to read, because it is a lot of information. So, and I wanted people to know, the condition of the buildings, what they look like across our system, the different needs as far as FCI renewal, those kind of things, which then determine where we need to go with accommodation pressures or not. Like Director Kelly said, the age of the buildings, how much renewal is actually in them. Is it affordable for us as a school board to fix these buildings? Because 5 or 6 years ago or 7 years ago, we would not have been able to do this to these buildings because we were only getting $6 million a year for this, and we needed, I don't even know how much it was back then, but it was a lot.
Supplemental.
Supplementary, then we have Trustee Hatfield, Trustee Sartori, and then Trustee Halberstadt.
And I have my hand up, Mr. Chair, Burgess.
Okay.
So this brings me to my next question. At any point, is this plan or is this report do we engage any urban planners, both locally or consultants? I know it was mentioned, but my concern with this is that it's a lot of numbers and a lot of projections based on the census data. But I'm concerned it's not a holistic picture because, while we do see all these things in bits and pieces, I am concerned that we're not being able to verify that or peer review, for lack of a better term. And I'm just wondering how we verify this this information, I guess, because there's a number of things, for example, that aren't cited necessarily. I don't know exactly where that number came from, and so I'm just curious if some of those details, that if I were to tease them out, how could we verify those elsewhere?
Well, it's basically the outside experts, that the consultants that we use, the Berger software, who also are experts with all of this information and do it for a number of places across North America. They have all that information. I don't know that myself. That's in their programming. That's their expertise. That's what they went to school for. So they help put that together. Then they bring it back down here. We go over it, and I go over it with the municipalities. I go over it with the schools, myself, look at the history of it, and we do we put the local knowledge to it, because sometimes what happens is the outside firms come back with the information. They don't just use the census data. They use their other data as well, but they come back with it, and some of the numbers are just not where they should be, based on what we know here.
Sure, and I appreciate that. I guess my question is, can we see that? Can we see those original pieces of information? Because I think there's a number of things in this report that I can point to another source to say that's not the number that I know. And so what I'm trying to get at is I want to really understand where we're getting our numbers from. And while I appreciate that, we can see the FCI and all that kind of stuff, I want to see the base data, and I'm just wondering if that can be featured, and if this is a report that comes back to us every year and has been changed over the years. Are we able to request a bit more detail and comprehensive data, especially in the citations as well, like citing where things are coming from, I guess. And I'd be happy to talk more about that, but there's some, I guess, gaps for me in where is that coming from, I guess.
Yeah, and that's not a problem.
Okay.
Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing is hi. It's a lot easier to give an overview of this report when you don't have to give any recommendations.
Very much so.
Big difference, yeah. So for me, I've always been interested in this period where we're not making big recommendations and closing schools and that kind of thing. But I spent some time looking at the portable allocations. That's always been something that I take a great interest in. And I looked at the number of portables for the schools that are listed and looked at the capital projects that either have been already approved or that are on the priority submissions to see how those capital priorities are going to address those portables, hopefully, if those things follow through and get approved. So then I was able to check off on the list which schools have a high number of portables and how they are going to be. If the capital priorities get approved, then those portable issues would get addressed, correct?
Yes, that's the goal.
They go together, right?
Right.
The one that stands out, though, that didn't have a game plan currently or in the near future is still Bellwood. And of course, that one's been on the list since the school was built. And I read carefully through the information on Bellwood, and we opened up the program at Marlborough to take some of the French immersion students to try and help with the accommodation issues at Bellwood, and I just couldn't see in the report where we're going to get some kind of resolution to that Bellwood situation.
Okay, so was it 2 years ago or 3 that we did Marlborough and Giles?
Yeah.
Approximately.
Yeah.
We did at the same time we did the Bellwood and Central, and so Central is taking the immersion students with their new boundary from what used to be the Bellwood area, every year it's being phased in, just like it's happening at Marlborough.
Right.
And so that number has already gone down from over 1,000 to 906.
So
Every year they will be getting kids that instead of going to Bellwood are now going to be going to Central for French immersion.
okay, but then how soon will that take us, or will it take us out of those portables?
So far it's working.
It is?
Yes,
So
it's already 100 students less than it was when we first did this.
100 left.
Yes.
Over 2 or 3 years.
Correct.
So that might be 3 portables, 3 or 4. So
It varies. It's probably 3.
So we'll probably still have 11 portables for the foreseeable future?
No. They'll be decreasing every year.
Okay, I hope so.
Yeah.
I really hope so, because that's always been a big concern, that particular one. Thank you.
So I have Trustee Sartori next. I'm not sure if Trustee Hatfield was setting a precedent, so I'm standing up. I know, I'm just kidding. Trustee Sartori, you can stand if you wish.
I'd also offer to Trustee Halberstadt, since this would be my second question. We're good? Okay. So we're talking a little bit of history tonight.
Okay.
Right, okay. So if I recall correctly, at the time that the report first came out, we were looking at upwards around 7,000 empty student spaces. Is that right? Is my memory correct?
I think it was even more than that, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe over 7,000, and there seemed to be some like a real sense of urgency at the time that we needed to deal with those empty student spaces. So when I add together the 2,900 in elementary, the 2,600 in elementary, and the whatever it was in secondary, I think I flipped it around. I think we're at around 5,000 now.
5,007, yeah.
So maybe in about the last 4 years, we've managed to, I guess, right-size schools and address about 2,000 empty student spaces. Is that a fair?
I would even say a little bit more than that.
Well, that actually was
counting the new builds. So then we will.
Okay, and that actually was my next question. So the numbers that are included in this report, they include they still include like the 2 sets, for example, of the Forest Glade schools, right?
Yes.
That are either we're waiting to hear back if I don't remember the detail, but that we've put out capital priority requests for them, right? And same with Giles and so forth. So what I'm curious about is if once those are all factored in, and considering what the on the ground capacity is in the new schools, how does that impact the 5,000 empty student spaces? Like, what are we looking at? More like 4,000 now?
Yeah, it takes us down to 3,200, I believe.
Okay.
There you go, 3,300.
Do we feel like there's a sense of urgency to address the empty student spaces right now, or it really, like the focus is around, and I know you've been asked this question before, what's our target as a board, right? And 0 is probably not realistic, but is our sort of focus right now on the empty student spaces or more on the FCI side of things, which is really where my focus
I would say
went to.
we're almost in a different spot right now. FCI is always something that we have to focus on, but because we've received all that money, a lot has been taken care of, so it's in a good spot now. And I want to say, Superintendent Armstrong, if I'm wrong here, but I think Juliana was talking about how this year is going to be the first year that we have a lot of the really I don't want to say broken, but the not so good infrastructure has now been fixed, so we can actually do some aesthetic additions to the schools, like windows, like, right. So we can do that finally. I think this year is what she has mentioned. There's still some high and urgent needs, but we'll be able to get to some of the aesthetic stuff.
Well, thank you for that. I feel like we're in a better place now in that sense than we were a few years ago then.
Right, and the other thing too, as I mentioned about the Queen Victoria School, I do think we're in a pretty good place now. The boundary adjustments will still have to occur, but it's more now about getting the portables down versus filling the empty spaces. Because I think those that are in the portables can move into the schools that have a little bit of space so that we're closer to the 100% in both of them.
Trustee Halberstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll use the peeking technique to see you there, Todd. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to administration and our systems people for the job they have done in the wards, especially in the wards 3 and 4 areas with Prince Edward and Queen Victoria, Hugh Beaton and John Campbell. Spent a lot of money in there, and I think it speaks well to our board that we're not letting these older schools deteriorate. But I do have one question, and like Trustee Higgison, I was looking at past year's reports, long-term accommodation plan. And Todd, you mentioned, and it was up there, I believe, that the board has nearly $463 million in expected 5-year renewal needs. Okay, but I go back to the same page last year in 2019-2030, and the figure was $368 million. So I wonder how that jives, since we've done all this reconstruction. How can it now be 463 after what we just saw, when last year it was 368?
So I think the best way to show you that, it's a really hard thing to understand because the ministry has their program that they use, and every year that rolls over, there's more parts to the school that become something that need repair. So even though you fix things that may have needed to be fixed 20 years ago, that goes off the books, but then more come. And so this is the best way to put it, though. If you look at 2013 up here, you can see where Hugh Beaton is. You can see where Marlborough is. Just as some examples, you can see where Prince Edward is. And I'll go to the next slide. There's nothing up there anymore. So that's key to see that. So we may have more monies in the needs of the 463. However, our schools are still in better shape. Those aren't necessarily as high and urgent as what we had 7 years ago or 8 years ago.
But it's probably a good thing that we have that figure, because it's an incentive to get the province to give us more money. Would that be?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
It's an incentive. If it's 463, it'd be incentive for the province to dish more money our way compared to
absolutely.
last year.
Yeah.
Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I had several, but a lot of them have been answered, so thank you for that to my colleagues. My question is mostly about page 144 in the printed report, and specifically about French immersion and its impact on the new K-12 build. When we have a dual-track school, particularly in the county, and you're drawing from lots of either dual or English language track schools in the area, families sometimes make a decision to place, if they have more than one child, all the siblings, all the children, in French immersion. But if a child doesn't do well, and with whatever support that we offer, they are often find themselves back into the English stream back at their home school. And then families have to make a decision whether to send their kids to a couple of different schools or just one school. With the K-12 build, we're going to be consolidating, of course, all the kids that used to go to Ruthven, the kids at Jack Meyer, the kids at KPS. Kingsville Public School is a dual track, And I note that you say that it's been fairly stable in the FI. It hasn't seen the same kind of growth. And I mentioned that because in your presentation you talked about FI is up, although this year it might be down. I'm thinking if FI is down, it's because that key piece of that tutorial piece or that, parent guardian tutor support isn't at a level in the household for virtual or correspondence learning, so they've opted out of FI for this year. They may come back. My concern is about how this accommodation plan doesn't take into consideration necessarily about our coterminous board arrangements when a new school is built. We're scheduled for the new K-12 to arrive in 2023, fingers crossed. Do you see that we have enough space in that new build, looking at what this accommodation plan has in it as far as reconciling the growth in FI, the so far stable kind of non-growth at KPS, but the attraction and novelty to outside our board going into FI and the general lift, in numbers for FI for our new school. So I'm sort of asking, because you've projected numbers up to 2024, 2023 for KPS, but of course we hope to have a new building by then. So I'm wondering why you have the same numbers there when I think, as in every other new build, we're going to attract new families to our new school.
Yeah, so it's a good question. We do have the room right now. We can't really predict necessarily who's going to come over from the other school. Typically, the individuals that are at the neighboring school right now will stay in the neighboring school. If they're grade 1 of October and older, they most likely wouldn't move into the French immersion just because of the program and the language. We hope to pull some from the coterminous boards, but it is hard to predict. And the other is Kingsville and Jack Minor over the years have been fairly stable populations, and they haven't really gone up so much or down. And so, I mean, that's part of what we do for the projections with that.
Right. And if I could, Mr. Chair, I'm just concerned the last line there, the FI program will be monitored when the new build is complete. And I just want to put a little asterisk there that I think we have to really monitor now and really try to figure out to anticipate what might be there from day one. And day one, hopefully, is only 3 years away. So I just want to note that I'm thinking that the predictions for 68% FI for KPS and stable numbers, I think we're going to see more than that. So I just want to note that because you know what it's like opening a new school with lots of portables. It looks like poor planning, and I would rather not see that.
And we
if
monitor.
We need to advocate for space. We have to do it now.
Right, and we monitor all of our French immersion programs because of the growth.
Trustee Higginson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you. I don't see Superintendent Mills here, so I don't know whether this question will, and so maybe Director Kelly, you can help out with this. The charts on pages 118 and 135, the ones talking about virtual schools, I really appreciated these being included, although, Superintendent Allender and I have had a brief conversation about this, that these numbers shift, and so that this is a snapshot, as is noted. But I really did appreciate having them in there because it gives us kind of some context. And what it mostly gives us context for is the things that we don't know. And that's really where my question starts here is, so I know that we can't know the definitive answer to this, but But we must know by this time that virtual school is at least going to be an option later, whether it's a full virtual school or at least virtual options will continue to be probably present in our system, and not just here at our board, but in boards across Ontario. And this may be a difficult question to ask or to answer, but what do we anticipate the impacts may be on funding when we have a virtual school that, when we're talking here about on-the-ground capacity, and we're talking about utilization of schools, and we're talking about FCIs of physical buildings, and then we have an entire virtual school system that runs? What do we anticipate may be some of the funding implications?
That's a really tough question, but thank you for asking, and certainly one to consider. It would certainly depend on how the ministry chose to deal with that funding issue. So it could pose challenges. I think it would be a question that boards all over the province would be asking and expecting some direction on. So it would be very difficult to do, but as you're saying, we're now in a context wherein a virtual school has been becoming a bit of a norm, that it could be something that could continue, and then what would that look like? I think those are questions that boards across the province will be answering, and I think we should, keep thinking about what that might look like. I don't know if Superintendent Allwinder has anything to add to that, but really I think that's a really challenging one to consider.
Yeah, and we would have to reevaluate. This would look different, because when you're talking about, if we have a virtual school, and if there's, I don't know, 7,000 students in it, if that was the case, there's a lot of empty space depending on where the teachers teach, right? So yeah, it would change the complexion of this significantly.
And quickly to follow up, and this again may be something that that Superintendent Mills may have to take a look at later, but I've been looking at I kind of took the data out and kind of messed around with it a little bit, looking at where we have larger concentrations of virtual school enrollments and where we have lower concentrations. And again, back to what I don't know, is we have some data on technology requests and technology saturation in some of these areas, and I'm wondering if we can get a better sense of whether the technology requests and the virtual school enrollments sort of intersect, or where we may, when we're looking at future planning and when we're looking at kind of strategic planning and where we're going to put our money, whether some of these trends, and we don't know enough yet to know what the trends would be, but some of the other data that we have on student engagement and on tech saturation and some of the social determinants of health that we have around, and when we know where the higher concentrations and lower concentrations are now in the system, whether that data, we can overlay that data with this data even as it moves, so that we can make some kind of future predictions on strategically.
Good point. I'm not sure necessarily what that would tell you, and whether that would be a transient, whether that would change. I'm not sure there would be a stagnant pattern to that, because I think it would depend on individual families. What we would want to make sure is we had the devices for students. I mean, it is something to consider. I know that, I think you've mentioned it before, the Superintendent Mills, is something to look at. But again, I think that sometimes we think there may be a high need for tech in one area, and then that seems to have changed, or people go virtual and then they go back and forth. But that's something we can look at for certain, and I know that it's on Superintendent Mills' radar.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the kind of shifting nature of it, and that much like we saw at our last education committee meeting, that a lot of these things we just don't know yet. But I think it's important that we kind of get out ahead of it, and while we have the data, even if we just use it now for the basis of where we do that strategic planning, I would really like to see that.
Trustee Sibkar, and then I'd like to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was around the virtual schools as well. I noticed that the numbers in some of the schools, for example, Massey, it's like almost half and half right now, and I know those numbers are fluctuating, but that really changes the actual capacity, like what Massey is experiencing in terms of overcapacity. From what I'm hearing from the response, it doesn't seem like there's any clear direction from the ministry at this point about what's going to happen with that. But would that in effect change the need for a new school, like in that area, and like how do we see this moving forward? I guess my concern is that this gives us a snapshot, but I'm concerned that if that number is the case, moving forward, we only have 600 to 800 students in a school. What are we expecting from the ministry in terms of funding and things like that? Like, how are they going to reassess the situation? Or has there been any indication from them at this point?
Like you, I don't know the answer to that, Trustee Sipkar, but I think it is something the ministry will have to consider. And again, we have, this has been a journey. We don't sort of know where we'll end up, but I think it's a realistic question, and what will be the plan for that from a ministry direction piece will be critical, I think.
And then on that note then, is this something that we should be thinking about as a Board of Trustees in our strategic planning in the new year? I know that, we have goals related to ethical stewardship. And my concern is we're going to have these big empty buildings or partially empty buildings that we don't know how to account for in our current modeling. And is this something that as a board that we can address via strategic planning or thinking about, even if the ministry isn't giving us as much direction?
Through the chair, I think that is something we could certainly look at. I think it's a difficult one. I really do, but I guess as you're indicating, like ethical stewardship is a key priority for us. So what does that look like as we move forward in this context, and what kind of, I do think we need some ministry direction because funding is really critical, but I think it's something to consider. How do we plan forward in light of what may happen? Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to move on to the annual report to the Board of Trustees for the year end August 31st, 2020. It's a handout. Is there anybody that's making a comment on that?
Just quickly to explain it, it's just the report that's required to the Board of Trustees to show that for the school year that ended August 31st, that the audit committee completed their work as required.
Thank you. Is there any questions on that? Okay, we'll move on to the report of the OPSBA delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had our Western regional meeting virtually, I believe it was November 7th, and both myself and Trustee Burgess participated. Central to the agenda, and I'll keep this brief as it was almost a 2-hour discussion, was around our red line items. And this was essentially giving direction to the OPSBA executive and the OPSBA staff about, what are the important lines in terms of funding and things like that, that if the ministry were to say this, what would be OPSBA's or a school board's response? And because our last regional meeting had been prior to COVID and everything was around labor relations and protecting like school board authority and sovereignty, I guess, in a way, things had shifted to COVID, and so the discussion was more so about that and around some of the funding pieces, particularly to our reserve funds and just things like that. So it was, like I said, a large part of the 2-hour discussion. So I can definitely send the minutes and follow up with any trustees. But I know I touched base with a number of you beforehand. So thank you for your comments. And Trustee Burgess was excellent as well to bring some of those forward. So that is it. There's also been a number of policy working group meetings. And again, it's all centered around a lot of the COVID response and what's happening in schools. So I would let Trustee Burgess jump in if she wants to add anything, but again, happy to share more offline with trustees if they want to know.
Thank you. Trustee Burgess, do you have anything to add? Okay, I'm going to move on to the chair's report. I do have a report. So as this year draws nearer to a close, I want to take this time to reflect upon my term as chair of the board. I did anticipate that 2020 would be a challenge as we faced forward signing new contracts with our various labor partners, a challenge that I felt would be overcome despite what seemed to be entrenched positions of the government. What I did not anticipate was a virus that would sweep across our country and the world to be declared a global pandemic. I was aware that the world was at risk of a pandemic because I had heard the medical community had been talking or theorizing about the risks for many years. And we've had other situations like SARS where we thought maybe we were going into a global pandemic. Unfortunately, this was the year, and the merging of theory and reality turned our world upside down. The closure of schools, the move to online virtual learning overnight was a test of our institutional fortitude. The challenge wasn't without its frustrations from all involved parties. Changing information and guidance on how best to handle the pandemic made that implementation of plans very difficult. Our graduating students went without traditional graduations and proms. Our retirees were not able to celebrate their contributions to education as they have in the past. With September on the horizon came the immense pressure to plan a return to school. Again, we were faced with making decisions based on constantly changing information, plans that were reviewed, approved, and then rejected. Ultimately, our model was put into place. Is it the way we would like to educate our children? Absolutely not. Is it the best alternative? To some, yes. To others, no. We are working with a model that is taxing on everyone. Long classes, online learning that is pushing our technology to its limits, anxiety levels in our students, parents, and staff that are at unprecedented levels. Social isolation puts additional stress on all. Add in the divergence of views and understanding on masking, PPE, transportation, bathroom breaks, lunch breaks, to name just a few, made governance and operational decisions all that more difficult. Yet here we are coming to the end of 2020. It's not all doom and gloom. Instead, what I have seen is heroics. Teachers that have stepped up and provided a teaching environment in the most challenging of circumstances. At my work, I've had numerous complimentary comments from coworkers about how great our teachers and our teaching assistants genuinely are. The efforts of our maintenance and janitorial workers to ready the schools for opening, the demands for enhanced cleaning to keep our schools clean are unprecedented. Late in August, on a Saturday, at a local hardware, I ran into a maintenance worker who was diligently working on a day off to ready the school, exhausted but determined. An IT department that acquired and distributed devices throughout the city and county, helping parents ensure their children could log on and learn. Our director and superintendents that stepped up and worked feverishly to interpret and implement the guidance provided by the Ministry of Education. Our union partners, a voice of reason while strongly advocating improvements and gaps they identified. They were focused on ensuring the best learning environment given the circumstances. Each and every member of this organization is a hero in my eyes. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, the guy from Welcome to My Neighborhood, once said, when I was very young, most of my childhood heroes wore capes, flew through the air, or picked up buildings with one arm. They were spectacular and got lots of attention. But as I grew, my heroes changed, so that now I can honestly say that anyone who does anything to help a child is a hero to me. That is what the personnel and partners of Greater Essex County District School Board are, and I thank you. So for whoever occupies this chair in our next year, know that you'll be challenged and at times exhausted. But my best advice is to get out of the way and let the heroes do the heavy lifting, because that's what they do a spectacular job of. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so moving on to trustee question period. Trustee questions.
I have a question of the chair's report, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I noticed yesterday that the Minister of Education tweeted out that he, he met with school leaders across the province and talked about the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario and many medical leaders believe schools, need to do to remain fundamentally safe, etc. And so there's still ongoing meetings on Monday afternoons. Are we attending that from our elected trustees, either you or our vice chair? I think it's every Monday at 2.
Well, I can tell you that we try to attend. Most recently, they've been canceled. I do share the invites with the vice chair. The minister is not always readily available on the day that is scheduled, and sometimes we get very late notice as to when he's going to speak. I know that he did speak about the possibility of a early Christmas break and how that might look. But we do our best between myself and Vice Chair Cook to attend when we can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my understanding is that they're still ongoing. It was something about the extension of time that he spoke of yesterday's meeting. But okay, I just wondered. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the director does attend those as well. And I think she would concur that they're all over the ice in terms of when they're scheduled. So I will go to trustee question period. Trustee Halberstadt? Oh, sorry. Student trustee Suave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is regarding the board's land acknowledgement. We had a couple students from Student Senate bring to our attention that it's such a great resource and that to have it in schools would be super beneficial to promoting FNMI voices in education. So has it been distributed to high schools, and is there any plan in place to have it in a public area where everyone can see it, because it is such a great resource?
Thank you for that. I agree. And I'm going to look to Superintendent Howard, because she's done a lot of work on that. We certainly have our Indigenous education protocol in schools, but I think you make a really good point in how can that become more a part of the culture of what we acknowledge in schools. So, Dr. Howard, did you?
Yes, I echo the comments from Director Kelly. I think that's a fabulous idea, and we could certainly create that possibility for all of our schools.
Perfect, thank you.
Trustee Halberstadt, or Hatfield.
Just a point of information on that. Before COVID came along and when we used to have graduations, when the board adopted the land acknowledgement, it was sent out to all of our schools to include it in special ceremonies, and it did become part of our graduation ceremonies. So I know that at least at those official occasions, the land acknowledgement was to start the ceremony, and there might have been other special occasions as well. So we did, once the board adopted it as part of our meetings, it was put out to the schools to become part of the ceremonies of the schools as well. So it should be there and it should be visible, but maybe it needs to be more visible. Yeah.
And I would concur. I've been to graduations when it first landed. I think there's some hesitancy on some people's part to read it because there are some tongue twisters in there. But once you've read it a few times, you get a little bit more smooth with it. So I have actually read it at graduations before I gave remarks, because the principal or whoever was organizing the graduation wasn't necessarily comfortable with it. So it's a very good point, and obviously I would like to see it be broadened in our footprint. So, Trustee Halberstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to trace back to the start of our meeting and the delegations, and in particular, I'd like to ask a question that was leveled by Sean O'Neill, that brave young man from LaSalle, with regard to his solutions for possibly making it an easier ride for online students or high school students, I guess. And his solution was, his major issue was 4-hour classes. I've heard that before, we all have. And his solution, when I asked him what his solution might be, he said, have 150-minute classes and limit it to that. So I'd like to ask administration what might prevent that from happening.
I can start that question through you, Mr. Chair. The timetable was arrived at. I know that if you look to Mr. O'Neill's comments, he would like to have extracurricular as well, and some other things. The timetable was arrived at in consultation with the senior team, so I can look to Superintendent Canty. You might be able to speak to that more. There are varying timetables all over. One thing I will say, though, is we're in a designated board, and we are limited to having 15 students per cohort per class, as directed by the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. So we are within those restrictions, and we have to also limit the number of contacts we can have within a week. So you couldn't have 3 or 4 periods in a day where students were switching classes. That just wouldn't be within the guidelines. But maybe Mr. Canty would like to add.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we wanted to do as much as possible too is to have as much face-to-face time with our students. So the period in the morning, again, we're only allowed to have one period a day, and I know that Mr. O'Neill would like to have 2 150-minute periods, but we can only have one period a day because of the contact, the number of contacts that the director alluded to. So by having the 225 minutes in the morning, that's the most face-to-face we can have with the students. Then the 75-minute class after the students go home is the at-home online period. So we tried to, safety was number one, but then having as much face-to-face as possible was the number 2 priority.
Okay, just a supplementary, could there be any relief down the road from that setup based on what the province is dictating?
Sure, if the direction was to change in terms of the number of contacts, that would, I think, allow for a timetable. It would also, if we were lifted as being a designated board, for example, that might allow the number of students in a class, but it still wouldn't change the number of periods. That's been something across the province that's been challenging for everyone.
Trustee Sipkar?
I have my hand up too, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As do I, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So through you to administration, so a two-part question. We just received word tonight via email while we're at this meeting that we have an outbreak in Bagley and the entire school is being dismissed. And we also heard from Minister Lecce today that there's a potential for an extended Christmas break. And we can see the way that the trends are in terms of COVID cases are rising. Is there any sort of indication that you can give to us tonight about what this will look like for our board? And is there any information that is not already publicly available that, indicates any sort of concern or direction from the ministry?
As you said, Trustee Sipkar, that the minister has really just sort of tipped his hat to suggest that they're exploring the idea of a winter break. We have had no firm direction on that. So we will, look to what they say. Yes, across the province, there have been trends. We now have moved to yellow, but there's still a couple other levels above us, and you see certainly some boards in the area of Peel and York and such that are really being affected. So I can't predict what they'll do about that, but if the outbreaks continue, you would imagine that there would be maybe some announcement by the ministry in terms of what that looks like. Whether that will be regionally, I don't know, but that would make some sense. But I think that there is concern around the holidays and the socializing over holidays and then what that would look like. So there's been no final direction that would appear to me to happen within the next week or two.
Just one supplemental to that, and I assume the answer is yes, but do we have a plan in place for what it would look like to go remote? I'm assuming that was maybe factored into our planning in the summer, but I'm just curious what that would look like if what that communication and direction would look like.
Thank you for that question. A good question, because of course that's our plan if we would be ready to, and the ministry has certainly done a survey to suggest how boards are ready. We had a discussion at senior team on Monday, a lengthy discussion about how that might look, and I know there's a team looking at that. Will people have the technology available to them? What would be that communication? What would it look like to families? Those are all things that are being considered, and so that is something we'll continue to have discussions with. But I know a group from the senior team met specifically about looking at all those things that we really need to consider. Some things might seem obvious, but we really need to have some good communication around that. So certainly it is top of mind to us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the folks on the phone next. So I'll go with Trustee Olmsted and then Trustee Burgess.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back to the presentations, again, that we had at the beginning of this meeting, particularly those that pointed to the disinfectants currently being used within our schools, the Virex and the other quats, I guess that's what they're called. I've done a little bit of research about this now that this has been brought to our attention, and there are dangers. I'm not a scientist. I've just read the reports and, again, listened to the passionate speakers this evening. But are there reasons why we are not exploring the use of other
Is now joining.
within our school. Like, is there anything specific why we're not using products with a hydrogen peroxide base, other than maybe we purchased Virex, or why are we depending on Virex when we know that these kind of disinfectants actually could cause potential health issues? And I'm all for disinfecting. I understand that, you know, this virus needs to be taken care of and that we need to be as cautious as possible and as safe as possible. But can we explore other options, particularly now that we've had these issues brought to us at a meeting and the public is concerned?
Through the chair, I wonder if Mr. Lozon would be comfortable speaking to that question.
Never used one of these. Thank you. And thank you very much for the question. The answer will be a slight bit lengthy, but I'll try to sum it up as best as possible. So let's start with a number of the studies provided in the package and a lot of the information that anyone can Google. A lot of those, when it comes to quaternary ammonium, or quats as we know them, refer to concentrates, and the information that was shared tonight also refers to the concentrated Virex versus the used solution. We use the used solution, so the mixture rate is 1 part concentrate to 256 parts water. That's the dilute. So if you read the safety data sheet and you actually come across the fact that the diluted version that we utilize in our schools, so this product, this comes right from the safety data sheet. This product, when diluted as stated on the label, is not classified as hazardous according to Occupational Health and Safety Act for the U.S., which is 29 CFR 1910-1200. HAZCOM, which is the U.S. Hazardous Products Legislation, GHS, Global Harmonized Safety, and the Canadian Hazardous Products Regulation, HPR, WHMIS 2015 GHS. So that's right from the safety data sheet, and that's the actual product we use, or the used solution that we use. So with that being said, we've used quaternarium ammonium, or Virex, as our main disinfectant for the past 12 years. You have to understand that quaternarium ammoniums, or quats, have been in usage throughout the globe for almost past 100 years. If anyone here has ever done laundry, you've used quaternary ammoniums. If anyone here has ever gone out to a restaurant to get a burger, fries, a steak, a coffee at Tim Hortons, they use quaternary ammoniums. It's a requirement under legislation. So we are required to use quaternary ammoniums when it comes to the food handling legislation for the province of Ontario, for our breakfast programs, our nutrition programs, our family studies, our culinary arts programs, and our cafeterias. Under the food handling regulation for the province of Ontario, you have 3 choices when it comes to disinfecting. Your first choice is chlorine. We can't use chlorine because bleach, for example, it reacts with too many products, and there's actually been fatalities to custodial staff at school boards in the province of Ontario using chlorine. So that's prohibited for school boards to utilize. Your next choice are quaternarium ammoniums, which are very commonplace, used everywhere, at every school board, every building, provincially. Every hospital uses them as well. And of course, all your food handlers. And your next one that you can utilize is called iodine. Iodine is hard to get a hold of as a disinfectant, and it also etches surfaces, no different than iodine that you'd use in a first aid kit. So that's not practical to utilize. So that's why we use quaternarium ammoniums. And just to give you some idea of chemicals in a typical school, a typical high school in our system has approximately 2,400 WHMIS-regulated products that we utilize, that we have vetted for safety of our students and of our staff. That's mainly for curriculum purposes versus custodial. Custodial, we have approximately 80 products. And of those, a handful of those are quaternary ammonium products. And with respect to curriculum delivery, of the remaining 2,400 minus the custodial, A handful, actually more than that, a percentage of those will also be quaternary ammoniums. So if we were to get rid of quaternary ammoniums, that would impact all of our programs as well as the nutrition breakfast programs, so on and so forth. So that's why we use it, because we have no other option. Another factor to consider is we do use what's called Oxivir, which is hydrogen peroxide based. That's in our arsenal. We do use it. We use that sparingly. Why do we use it sparingly? One of the main factors we have to consider is pH. Right? Myself, I'm an industrial hygienist. I've been with the board 20 years, been doing health and safety for 30 years. So pH of a chemical when you use it is one of the main safety factors you have to consider for the user as well as residuals and people that would come in contact with the surface. So hydrogen peroxide or Oxivir, we do use. We use that for high-touch surfaces such as door handles, handrails, light switches, and we use that daily, and our custodians use it, but the used solution of Oxivir is a pH of 3.3. Human body is 7.4, and the actual pH of Oxivir being 3.3 is closer to battery acid. So we have to be very careful how we use that, where we use that, and exercise safety precautions. When it comes to Oxivir, when it comes to Virex, the used solution, this is the dilute, 1 part solution concentrate, 256 parts water. The used solution has a pH of 8.8, which is the equivalency of, actually it's less than soap. So anyone here who uses soap, it's a pH of 9. So that's a safety margin we use for measuring a product and its impact on people, contact, and surfaces. So 8.8, human body 7.4. It's very, very safe to utilize, is recognized by Canadian, provincial, recognized, accredited, Health Canada, Public Health Ontario, and the Ministry of Health. We've also had 2 visits from anonymous complaints out to 2 of our sites. I'll wrap this up shortly. I apologize for the time. But they've been investigated by the Ministry of Labor as well as the Ministry of Health, and they have found that our product is being used appropriately and is safe, and they recommend our continued usage of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Olmsted, do you have a supplementary?
No, I don't, Trustee Leclerc. I needed a little bit of clarification. Obviously, the information that was brought was very passionately brought forward, and I've researched as well as I can, but I'm certainly not really educated in that matter, and so I needed to hear directly from senior administration just how we actually use these kind of disinfectants in our school and what the safety is. So I appreciate that very comprehensive answer, and I was taking a lot of notes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that very informative lesson in less than 5 minutes. So there's a lot of information there. Very much appreciated. Thank you. Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's probably wise to note that Mr. Lozon is our health and safety expert on our board. His title wasn't given.
He did say his title.
Right, in his thing, right. So 2 of my questions have already been asked, but I do have a couple of questions, so I'll just ask the first one as a supplemental question to Trustee Halberstadt's question. And it goes, it's about the Mr. O'Neill's presentation as a speaker about the scheduling changes that were asked. I was going to ask if it impacted transportation since we're on in a consortium. I'm not sure it would, but from what I could get, and I don't have the written thing in front of me, from what I can gather, he was, I think, asking for us to maybe advocate to be not a designated board. I wanted to make sure that it was clear that it's not up to us except for our personal behavior and trying to keep the transmission of the disease at bay. We can't change the designation of our board. It was clear that it's And the other thing was about extracurricular and assemblies. Right now, my understanding that I'm getting...
Trustee Burgess, could you mute your live stream? Oh.
I don't have a live stream on.
Okay, sorry. I thought it was coming from you, but Madame Leboeuf is indicating otherwise. So continue, please.
My question is that is for administration. It's my understanding that we can't have full school assemblies and keep physical distancing in any of our facilities except if it's outside.
That would be right. That would be correct.
Okay. So that actually, at this point in time, since we have no authority to change the designation of our school as far as risk factors goes, it's an impossibility to meet. We cannot do the full school assembly, because I thought I heard that as a direct request.
Yes, it was in his notes.
Okay. So if I could ask a second question, or I will wait.
Go ahead.
Turn. My question is about inclement weather days. I saw the first snow today on the railing outside my house, and my understanding is that there are other boards that are not going to have snow days. They've already made the decision that if transportation was called off, buses aren't running, that they would run virtual classes. Have we made that decision yet? Will there be snow days where kids are just going to be staying home and expected to not learn anything formally, except under the instruction of whatever they take on in a self-motivated way? Or will we be offering virtual classes if buses aren't running?
Director Kelly, Trustee Burgess, we are in discussion with that. In fact, we discussed that this week, and Superintendent Armstrong and I discussed it today, so we will be communicating that information. You're right, there are different perspectives on that. I've talked to other boards about that.
Trustee Hatfield on that. Oh, okay, I'll put you on the list then. Okay, so I'm now to Trustee Chin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is for Dr. Ahmed. As I think he's a very valuable person, and he's gone. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate. And since seems that a lot of trustees that rely on the Dr. Ahmed on the decision regarding the mandatory masks. So I want to clarify something, because I don't want to put too much pressure on, too much burden on Dr. Ahmed, and I don't want him to be responsible if something bad happened in the future. So I want to clarify something. First, that I think he mentioned that when we make the rules and it's difficult to implement. I think it's two different things. And based on other boards' practice, there are a lot of boards, they have already mandatory masks for the young kids, and nothing bad happened. So I think this is a verification about how we can implement it. It's not too difficult, and we can always give a lot of flexibility. And when we using that, for example, if parents can ask for waiving, and we can ask the bus driver not to drop the students without a mask. So there is always something to compensate instead of just refusing a good policy to protect kids. And I think there are some change for the circumstance. One is the airborne affection has been a particular way for transferring spreading the virus. This is a new one compared to the previous knowledge, airborne spread virus. And then another is that what we mentioned, the masks. And on April 4th, and Chief Officer, Health Officer Tam shifted her tone and stopped recommending against the wearing of non-medical masks. That means that before April 4th, and Dr. Tam said recommend against the mask, but but we know when the virus start is in January. So for several months, she changed her tone regarding the wearing a mask. So
You have to get to a question.
yeah. My question is that if it's true, and also Dr. Tam has backtracked before on the risk posed to Canadians by COVID-19, on the usefulness of travel restrictions, and now on the efficacy of masks for asymptomatic individuals. Yeah, so...
Trustee Cheen, I don't know how Dr. Ahmed can answer about Dr. Tam's decisions.
Yeah.
So you need to clarify what your question is, because you're stating a lot of things, but you're not asking a question that's specific to Dr. Ahmed. If you'd like him to answer a question, please.
Yeah, this regarding the public face to the health authorities. And previously, we have viewed all the examples that they lag back a lot. And when things happen, they didn't prevent and allowed things to be more serious. That's what my concern is, that the current situation is changing, and winter is coming, and the airborne is spreading virus. So why we allow all the kids to be there in the danger, take the risk? And it's also there is research said that the young kids can bring the virus to their family members without they have any symptoms. So it's really dangerous to all the people.
Trustee Cheen.
Yeah.
You need to ask a specific question. You're commentating on your belief in what's happening. You need to ask, if you want Dr. Ahmed to answer a question, you need to ask him a specific question.
My question is that I didn't see that Dr. Ahmed are against the rules to mandatory. He said it's good for the kids to have it, but I just want him to verify his opinion, because a lot of trustees depends on him. I think that.
So you're asking whether or not Dr. Ahmed believes that mandatory masks are good. I believe he said earlier they were recommended, but I will let Dr. Ahmed speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick comment on, I think, just this misconception that whether we're talking about Dr. Tam or any of the public health officials, I think no one backtracked anything. It's the level of understanding, and it's unfortunate that people are trying to understand complex public health decisions based on the information that they have access to, and it just makes it very difficult because when you're understanding the rationale that why a recommendation is made, why a mandatory requirement is made, versus what is best practices that is working and what's not working, what we know versus what we know, and how do we balance all those things to come up to any recommendation. So just as a preamble to that, and then going back to the initial question of the mandatory mask requirements versus the effectiveness, and I think as I mentioned earlier, as far as the effectiveness is concerned, I think but there is no concerns, or in my mind, that whether people should be wearing masks when they're outside. Yes, they should. Then when we're talking about the effectiveness of masks based on different environments and then different age group and how the masks are used, you have to understand that all of those factors come in play. When we are making decisions about ourselves, it's very easy. We know who we are, how we can understand any of these decisions, and how we will adapt many of those decisions. When making anything mandatory, I think we have to take into consideration human behavior. We have to take into consideration our understanding and knowledge of things. When the pandemic started, there are many things that we didn't know. And then there's many things that people didn't know. And then the acceptance of how these information is processed in everyone's mind, and then the recommendations accordingly is we can talk about those recommendations. So the question if it was whether I still feel that the mandatory requirements or masking should be there, which is already there. I think I don't need to even say that. It's already there. It's required. When it comes to the children, we feel that the children, because of their level of understanding and compliance, it varies individual to individual. So there is a strong recommendation, and obviously I am recommending that. But when it comes to making it mandatory, I think we have to take that into consideration of who we are asking, and given the special circumstances, some of those recommendations would go back to the individual situation and adopted appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Cook.
So I just have a question. I really appreciate your information that you shared. You made it very easy for us to understand, but I just have a quick question. You were saying Virex 256:1 is what we use, the board uses. So when we had the presentations and they're talking about all the side effects of Virex, are they talking about Virex that has not been concentrated? Because when we look it up, I mean, you can see all the side effects. You know what I mean? It gives you all the bad stuff. But that is that the Virex that has not been concentrated?
Diluted. Yes. Yes.
So I want to make sure I'm following proper protocols. Thank you very much for the question. And all I can tell you is what I see, because I'm not the author of these reports. But based on the tables, clearly it's referring to the concentrate versus the dilute. So to me, that's clear on the table. And if you go across the table on two of those charts, you'll see it's concentrate, and you go all the way across. So that's clearly not the dilute. And then I'll go back to the safety data sheet. I'll go back to Health Canada, and I'll go back to our governing bodies that are accredited. And again, so the hazardous products regulation, which really sets the standard for WHMIS legislation that we apply to for Ontario Regulation 860. I apologize, that's how I speak. I think I've made that apology here before. So under a legislation that applies to us, that actual use solution for Virex doesn't even fall under WHMIS legislation. So we don't even have to have a safety data sheet for it. We don't even have to have it as part of our WHMIS training. It's that dilute. It is that safe. It is non-hazardous. By their definition, not by us saying it, that's the government saying it's non-hazardous.
Trustee Higginson.
Excuse.
Trustee Burgess.
I don't have an additional question. Mine were answered by previous speakers. Thanks.
Okay, I heard somebody say excuse me, so I thought it was you.
Hello?
Oh, okay. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. It was spoken about briefly tonight that we literally just got an email now that there's been a school-wide outbreak at Begley, and I'm wondering if the director, I know I see Superintendent Pike is currently dealing with this right now. I'm wondering if we can speak to the public about that outbreak and what happens with our outbreak protocol should something like this happen elsewhere.
Superintendent Pike is not here, and she's working on that. That communication has already gone to the affected people, the staff, the families. There's been, I believe,
Hello?
Trustee have been notified, and there will be follow-up in terms of clinics tomorrow for testing that, in fact, I was just in touch with public health as well as the CEO of the hospital for testing. So there is a protocol, and that is being worked through, and there's good communication, and we're following our protocol.
And just for clarification, that outbreak plan is still up on our website if people have questions about what may what that may look like in the coming days, and for their own, even if they're not a Begley family, for their own clarification, they can look on the website at the outbreak plan and know what could potentially they might be able to prepare for.
Yes, and of course, we do look to tweak things as they move forward to make sure that our communication is good and we continue to work with public health. But yes, you could find direction on there, and certainly public health could also assist.
Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you. So my question is about the Begley situation, but my question is different. So as my understanding that the whole school now is isolating for a period of 14 days at the direction of the health unit. So what I wanted to ask administration...
I'm trying to respond.
Could you hold 1 second, point of order? So for the individuals that are on the phone as guests, they are not permitted at this time to address the board. They were only allowed to speak during speakers list portion. So please refrain from trying to make a comment while the board is in question period. Thank you.
So this is our first experience with a full school closure because of an outbreak. So my question is, what happens during that 14-day period? Is there any learning experience, any kind of remote learning offered to the students, or does like everything just shut down for the 14 days?
I know Superintendent Pike's been in touch with the school, but it would be planned to have some continued learning occur. What that's going to look like, she could provide more details. I know she probably has communicated that to the community.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for detail. I just want to know if something was going to be going on. Okay, thank you. Glad to hear that.
Thank you. Trustee Halberstadt.
Thank you. I just want another quick question of Tim. Tim, what I've heard is the reason that some parents are upset about this is the quantity of Virex that are being used now for deep cleaning, and that it's I've heard a couple of examples that it's extreme, the application of Virex, and this is why now it's become a hazard to the people around it.
I thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, what we have not had come forward is any specifics. So no one has brought into us a specific school with a specific concern of an accumulation of extra clean. So we're certainly unaware, and no one has flagged that to us. But if someone can give us an example of what they believe that to be, we'd be happy to investigate and address that accordingly. But I will refer back to our visits from the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Health at two of our sites that were responding to 2 complaints. And they reviewed and they found no issues, and they found our usage and application of the product is in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements, and no issues, and those reports are available.
Okay, I have a couple questions that I'd like to ask. The first one is they're both related to Mario Spagnuolo's presentation earlier this evening. I was a bit surprised to learn that our teachers are not working from home, that are teaching virtually. So I'm wondering what, if anything, are the barriers from permitting teachers from working from home, given that the province of Ontario, again today, highly recommended that when possible, staff should work from home. So I'm wondering what barriers may exist and what we can do to get beyond those barriers.
That is something we would certainly consider, but there, at this point, you said there has been new direction, so we'll look into that. But people have been working within a school community. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that. But again, there are some liability issues in terms of working at home. But again, we can certainly explore that.
And my second question also goes to that. So as we're all aware, the province allowed us to increase our dip into our surplus, and we know as a board that we permitted a 1% increase or a 1% flexibility, knowing that we could go up to 2%, but we chose not to go that route at this time. I guess my question is, if the board, if the Director of Education and the Superintendent of Finance determined that they identified a need and there was gaps that needed to be filled to address COVID-related expenses, would you be in a position, or do you feel that you would be bringing those forward to the Board of Trustees for approval?
Yes.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Notices of motion.
I have one, Mr. Chair.
You have a notice of motion?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
It's a recommendation, and that the GECDSB recommend that masks are worn by all students attending in-person classes in all schools across our district. And I expect that to be on the agenda of the newly organized board, so I think that's December 8th.
Trustee Burgess, in the previous incarnation of a motion that was very similar to that, were you on the prevailing side?
Yeah, it's not a motion to reconsider. It's a new motion.
No, it's not.
We have no bylaw.
It's not a new motion. It's a similar motion to one that was already defeated. It's not a motion to reconsider. So the only way it can come back to the floor is if somebody on the prevailing side brings it forward.
We don't have that rule in our bylaws any longer.
That's a Roberts rule.
I would ask you to quote that.
I'll be glad to find it for you and send it to you. In the meantime, if I'm incorrect, I'll make sure it gets placed on the agenda. But it's the same motion that we've had multiple attempts to come to this board when we've already voted on it. Is there any other notices of motion?
I will forward that to Madam LeBeouf, and I will ask you to rule and show me that why it can't go forward. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I think you outlined it in an email earlier today why it couldn't. But I will look into it. You did send out an email to everybody earlier today outlining why you didn't think it could get onto the floor. So anyway.
This evening, I asked for a notice of motion.
Yep, and I'm ruling that I believe it's out of order unless I find otherwise. Are there any other notices of motion? Are there any announcements?
I have an announcement, Burgess.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Migration Hall Board of Directors is inviting all the public, the entire community, to join them on Wednesday, November 25th at 6 p.m. for their annual general meeting. Migration Hall is always looking for new and returning volunteers, not only for the Board of Directors, but also for a variety of subcommittees and specific events and activities. We are asking to please contact Kimberly Heaton, the Migration Hall manager, at 519-733-6200, or to email her at migrationhallmanager@gmail.com to announce your interest in attending. We want to note that due to COVID-19 restrictions, all guests must pre-register for the AGM, and we'll be meeting virtually. A code will be provided by email once you're registered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Burgess. Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make an announcement because I didn't know where else to put this in response to your chair's report. And so I'm announcing that I would like to say thank you for your services to the board this year. It was not an easy year to be the chair of the board, and on a number of levels there were challenges left and right, and I think that you handled them admirably and worked well with the senior administration to get us through just a crazy, unprecedented period of time. And I wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for your service to the board.
Thank you. I did feel like I was canoeing upstream at times. Any other, Trustee Halberstadt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. Good job this year. My announcement is that this is bullying, anti-bullying and awareness week and prevention week of bullying and anti-racism. And the board is using, according to Sharon Pike, who's not here tonight, they're using drama to promote the intersection of anti-bullying and anti-racism. And there's a meeting next Monday at 3 o'clock of the anti-bullying committee, which I'm on, and a couple other trustees. So hopefully they'll be there, and maybe somebody else might want to listen in. It's a virtual meeting.
Trustee Chin?
Oh, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you, Ron, for your leadership here, and you did a great job. And I know how hard it is, especially if I give you a lot of difficulties, I think. And you send messages to me at midnight, and we convey, opinions with each other. But I really appreciate I know how hard you are working for us. So I appreciate. And I hope you will forgive me if I said anything wrong. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. You've not said anything wrong. I appreciate your everybody's kind thoughts. It has been a tough year. I've had to make some significantly difficult rulings at times, and probably didn't make friends along the way. But I just try to do things like I do when I'm at work as a police officer, fair and equitable, and that's always my goal. So, are there any other announcements? So, thank you everybody for working with me this year. I really appreciate it. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.